All right, peace and blessings, family. This is Brother Joab. Happy Sabbath and peace be upon you all to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. And once again, I got Brother Gamaliel with me from Kentucky.
Peace and goodwill.
And Lord's willing, today, through the Spirit of the Most High, through His Son Christ, HaMashiach, the Anointed One, we'll be going over the rise of the Hasmoneans, as well as the history of the Pharisees and when they came about. But this is most likely going to be a two-part video. So the first part, we're going to touch on a little bit of going into the New Testament, and then we're going to go backtrack and how the Hasmoneans came into power and thus where the Pharisees came from. So like I said, Lord's willing, through the Spirit of the Most High, as we get into the lesson, most likely is going to be a two-part lesson, which we'll continue probably sometime next week, or if it being the Lord's will, next Sabbath. So without further ado, Lord's willing, we'll get into the lesson.
Okay, I am going to start in the book of John, chapter 8, actually. Which is interesting, and it's good to research the history on these scriptures and who people are and what was going on around these times and how things came to be, just to be more edified and have a better understanding, solve some questions. Reading in the scriptures, I'm sure people have always wanted to know, who are these Pharisees, where did they come from? Because you read through the scriptures and you see things change and things go on, you know, to show that this Bible is real and we actually took place in time, you know, and went through things as a nation just like everybody else did. You know, we're going to read in the scriptures and read through the history and find out, you know, how we came to be or how things came to be in the time of Christ and why they are what we're reading about now. And I'm going to read here in John chapter 8. I'm going to start at verse 31. It says, "Then said Jesus to those Jews which believed on him, if ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed." 32, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Verse 33, "Then they answered him, We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made? How sayest thou, ye shall be made free?" Okay, when you read that, it would seem like it doesn't make sense. What's wrong with these Pharisees that they saying we were never in bondage? When you know the history of Israel, we were constantly in bondage, and even now, Rome is the ruling power over them. You know, where we don't even have our own king. You know, we're still subject to them paying tribute and taxes to Rome, to Caesar, and all of them. So it doesn't, you know, at first glance you see that and be like, well, that don't make no sense. What's wrong with these Pharisees? But they say we were Abraham's seed and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? What they are ignoring, they're rejecting Christ, is what they're doing. They're rejecting the whole point of the Messiah coming, and that was to die for their sins, for our sins as a people. You see, but they hold themselves to be holy, okay, and blameless, though they be corrupt. Like you read in Matthew, and John is telling them, is asking them, who warned y'all to be baptized? How are you going to escape from the wrath to come? Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Who told you to come down here to this baptism? You know, and he said, we need to be baptized, we need to receive the gift of the Holy Ghost from Christ. And he's telling these Pharisees who's proud, he said, don't think to yourselves to say we have Abraham to our father, thinking that y'all gonna be saved just because you're the children of Abraham. The promises was made to Abraham that his seed is going to be rulers of the earth, you know, because God is able to raise up stones to Abraham to be his children, turn the stones into people for him. You see what I'm saying? So what they was going through is being prideful because of the promise that was made to Abraham, because they know that we are the holy people and were to be above all nations. But, you know, neglect the fact that if you do sin, like Christ is going to say here in 34, Jesus answered them, verily, verily I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. Okay. Well, now he's explaining to them, I wasn't saying about no bondage to man or anything like that. You need to be free from your sins. Okay. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the son abideth ever. I mean, you Abraham's seed, but you need to go through Christ to receive the remission of your sins, that you might live forever. 36. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. Okay, 37. I know that ye are Abraham's seed, but ye seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you. So there's a scripture, Joarib, if you know where it said, I believe it's in Romans. He says, not because they are Abraham's seed are they going to be accepted into the kingdom, neither because, you know, are they the children of Israel.
Romans 9. Let me get it.
That's Romans 9. Yeah, go ahead. You can read it. I don't know. He said, my word have no place in you. I'll read on till you got it. 38. I speak that which I have seen with my father, and ye do that which ye have seen with your father.
Okay, I got it.
Go ahead.
I'll start at verse 1. Romans 9:1. Actually, yeah, I'll start at verse 1. Romans 9:1. I say the truth in Christ, I lie not. My conscience also bearing me witness in the Holy Ghost. Heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption, and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises, who are the fathers, whose are the fathers, and of whom are concerning the flesh Christ came, who is over all, God bless forever. Amen. Not as though the word of God have taken none effect, for they are not all Israel, which are of Israel, neither because they are the seed of Abraham, are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. We're going to keep going. That's what you wanted.
Right. So just because y'all are the seed of Israel, you're the seed of Abraham, that means nothing. But the scripture says, in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Okay. This promise. The promise come through Abraham, come through Isaac, come through Jacob, on down to Jesus the Christ. This was the promise. He was the seed. Okay. And it's through him that we have to go through. There's Israel, which is in the flesh, which is the Pharisees. There's Israel, which is in the spirit, which is them that follow after Christ. You can read throughout the scriptures in Acts and see that it was the Pharisees teaching people that they had to keep the whole law of Moses to be saved, and be circumcised after the manner of Moses. I'm saying all of this because there is a teaching that the Pharisees were not Israelites, and that they were Edomites who made their way into the eldership and the rulership of Israel. But we're going to read in the scriptures now and in the history today how the Pharisees came about, and they are in fact our own people. They are Israelites. Read that where Paul talks about him being a Pharisee. You know where it's at?
Yeah, it's in Acts. Let me do it real quick.
So Paul himself, I don't think it's in Acts though. I think it's in Hebrews. But Paul said himself that he was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. And he was from the tribe of Benjamin, as you can read in the book of Romans chapter 11. So Pharisees was people from our own tribes, you know, who had, most of them had gone off from the law and was doing their own thing. And we read about that too eventually. Where Christ said, they teach you the law. They sit in Moses' seat. Do what they tell you to do, but don't do as you see them do. Because they do. Yeah, go ahead.
Acts 23:6. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided.
Right. So Paul, a Benjamite of Israel, from the tribe of Benjamin, he was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. So his family was Pharisees. You see what I'm saying? And he was an Israelite man from the tribe of Benjamin, and he left all of that to follow Christ. So, and I will show you why in the scriptures right here, why men are saying that the Pharisees is Edomites and not Israelites. Where was I at? Verse 39, John 8:39. They answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus saith unto them, if ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham. Because Abraham kept God's commandments and he believed the word that God said unto him, which is what he's talking about. Because in Romans chapter 3 or in chapter 4, it says, we believe, we follow. When we believe and we follow after Christ, we walk in the steps of our father Abraham. That's why you are the children of Abraham, through faith. Right? And that's not to say that other nations are grafted into that. That was what was given to Israel. You know, that was only made to Abraham's seed, to Isaac's seed, to Jacob's seed. Verse 40. But now ye seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. So he's saying you're not the children of Abraham because you don't do the works of Abraham. Right? Verse 41. So he's talking spiritually. Yeah, you're Abraham's seed. You came out of his body, you came out of his loins. You came through Isaac, you came through Israel, all these righteous prophets, faithful men, but you're not really of them. They're not really your fathers because you do not do the works of them. Okay. 41. Ye do the deeds of your father. Then said they to him, we be not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. So now they're going, so they you know, he's calling them out and saying, y'all not keeping no commandments for real. Y'all not doing what Abraham is doing, what Isaac, Jacob, and all of them is doing. You do the works of your father. So no, our Father is God, they saying. 42. Jesus said unto them, if God were your father, ye would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. So he's calling them out. So just like you do the works of God, we are the children of God. Who the scripture said, if any man does righteousness, it is because he is born of God. right? Where is it at? Verse 43. Why do ye not understand my speech? So he's telling them, and he's telling us, they did not really even understand what he was saying. He's telling them that they're in sin. Y'all are the servants of sin, and your father is the devil. Even because ye cannot hear my word. Verse 44, ye are of your father, the devil, and the lusts.
Let me say something real quick. My bad. Even from that scripture as well, that's what a lot of people use to say, oh, these are actual literally the devil's seed, and Cain is of the devil. That's not what that scripture is talking about. What this like when you read in 1 John, like it says, you are of your father the devil, for that he was a murderer from the beginning. It's not talking about literally the devil's seed. That's not what it's talking about. You in sin, and you going, when you're doing that, you're going against God. You're serving Satan more than you are the Most High. Because why? When you commit sin, you transgress the law. So you're going against what God is saying, and you're doing what? Servitude to the devil or Satan. So a lot of people take those scriptures and say what? Oh, Eve, and that's what Cain was born. When you read in Genesis, it says Adam knew Eve and begot Cain. Adam knew Eve and begot Abel. So now when you do that, so who is lying? Let God's word be true and every man a liar. So which one is it? Is Cain the seed of the devil, or is he the seed of Adam, like the scriptures say? Because the scriptures say Adam knew Eve and begot Cain. So now they take that literally. And even if you want to go down that route, and when the flood happened, everybody was destroyed except for Noah's seed and his family. So how is a remnant of the devil producing if they were destroyed during the flood? Those are things you got to think about. That's why the scripture said, let God's word be true and every man alive. We got to stay out these books of Enoch and these Jasher and Jubilees and these other books that preach that and stick to the gospel. Go ahead, brother.
Right. All of these false doctrines is meant to turn us away from the truth, the knowledge of Christ. He's trying to tell them about repenting. You are of the devil because you do the works of the devil, a liar from the beginning. Hold on, I'm gonna read 44. Ye are of your father, the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So, just like the scripture says, be ye followers of God as dear children, you repent and you turn to God, and we are his children. But we know that God did not lay with somebody and brought forth children the way that man does. It's the same way with the devil. It's who you serve is who you serve. The same when he's saying you are of your father the devil, he's saying you're serving sin. Or if he's saying this man is of God, he's saying that he's serving righteousness. You see, it's not so. When people take this scripture and say you are of your father the devil, and they use the scripture to say Pharisees were white people, it's because of the lust and the hatred that people have, you know, for other people, for other nations or whatever. Now, I'm not saying that other nations is going to be brought into, you know, the fold and Christ and all of that. No, but we are not to misuse these scriptures to preach hatred. These people right here who he is saying is of the devil is Israelites. Just like just like Christ said to his disciples, one of you is a devil. That didn't mean Judas was a white man. It means he didn't believe. It means he knew who it was that was going to betray him, because he's doing the works of the devil. And who did he work together with? The Pharisees. They worked together. So that's basically, that's what they saying. They saying we Israelites, we the seed of Abraham, we can't be touched. No, yes, you can. be touched if you're not doing the works of God. So this scripture is not teaching that that the Pharisees were Edomites, that they was white people ruling over Israel, and that's why they rejected Christ. That's not what it's saying at all. He's simply saying y'all are serving sin and y'all don't do the works of Abraham. Therefore, you're not of Abraham because you're not of God. Abraham was of God. He did the works of God. If we don't do the works of Abraham, we're not doing the works of God. If just like the scripture says, if any man have not the spirit of God, he is none of his. I don't care if you're an Israelite. I don't care if you're the seed of Abraham. If you don't have the spirit of God, then you're not of God. So he says, you do the works of your father, the devil. You are of your father, the devil. Okay. Let me get John chapter 1. Just to show two more scriptures and then get into the history of all this. John chapter 1. John chapter 1, verse 9, verse 10. And this is John testifying of Christ. John chapter 1, verse 10. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. What was that talking about? It said his own received him not. Meaning the people of Israel did not receive him. The elders, the scribes, the Pharisees and Sadducees, the priests, all his own did not receive him. Because you can look in the scriptures and see plainly that he was followed by multitudes of people that believed on him, that was looking for healing, some just looking for healing, some believe, whatever it was. But it said he came to his own. Christ did not come to other nations. He did not go to the other nations. And that includes the Canaanite woman who was called a Greek. She's an Israelite woman. That includes the woman of Samaria. You know, he did not go to people of other nations. He came to his own. Okay. Verse 12. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. So you see how it works. But see, if he came to his own, that means he came to who? The seed of Abraham. Hebrews chapter 2:16 says he took not on him the nature of angels, but the seed of Abraham, right? And he was an Israelite man from the tribe of Judah. So he came to his own people. The Pharisees is not a different people. But it says here, even though there was some of his own that did not receive him. Why? Because the word of God was not in them, because they did not believe. But John chapter 1 verse 12 says, but as many as received him, meaning as many of his own people that did believe on him, which some were Pharisees, some were teachers. Nicodemus, he was a master. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. Okay, even to them that believe on his name. So it's not, they're not talking about their birth, their origin. He's talking about the works that you do. You don't have the power to become the sons of God because you don't do the works of God, because you don't believe like Abraham believed. Verse 13, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Okay, that is how you become, the children of Abraham, through faith. Let me say it again. That is how the Israelites become the children of Abraham. in the spirit through Christ, the children of God. It all works together. And there's a lot of scriptures we can read on that to explain that. Keep in mind that Christ said he is not the God of the dead, but he is the God of the living. Okay, it's a different life to be the children of Abraham because he was in a different spirit. They saying we are his seed, so we just protected by that. He's saying you are not of the same spirit that Abraham was, so you are not protected by that. So just to show these Pharisees was not of another nation. They were his own people. They was the seed of Abraham, but they was unbelieving. And that's all it was. They was unbelieving. Mark 8:31. The book of Mark, chapter 8, verse 31 says, and he began to teach them, talking about Christ, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. So this is who he was rejected by. He says he's rejected. He must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders of Israel, and of the chief priests, his own people, and scribes, people who knew the law, and be killed. We was the ones that rejected him. Our people was the ones that rejected him, and we worked together or sought the help of Herod, Pontius Pilate, or not Herod, but Pontius Pilate, and even Pontius Pilate, the Edomite, is the one who said, I don't see no fault in this man. This is your own law. You deal with it. So it's written in the scriptures. It's telling you plainly, these Pharisees was our people. But we threatened, the elders of our people threatened Pontius Pilate, saying, we're going to tell Caesar that you are not his friend. So he washed his hands and said, this is a matter of your law. You go deal with this. Let me get one more place, and I forgot what it was. Oh, John chapter 11. Now, then they took away the stone. And he that was dead. Where's scripture at that talks about how
We're looking for.
He said to them, now you have no cloak for your sin.
Oh, hold on.
That's in John. Or so. I'll read this right quick.
That's John 15. John 15 and 22.
That's John 15.
Yeah, John 15 and 22.
John 15.
Got it? You want me to get it?
I got it. Nah, that ain't what I'm looking for. It says, you say, now you say we see. He said, because you say we see, he said something like, had you been blind, you wouldn't have no sin. But now because y'all say that we see.
John 9:41.
Yep. That sounds like it.
John 9:41.
Okay. I started 40. This is after he healed a blind man, and they did not believe on him. They still, the Pharisees and everybody didn't believe on him. They said, who do you think you are? You're going to teach us the scriptures, and you was altogether born in sin or whatever. So, the Pharisees, obviously the teachers of the law and everything, and they didn't believe on him. So this blind man was healed. And John chapter 9, verse 40 says, and some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, are we blind also? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see. Therefore your sin remaineth. So why would he be speaking that to another nation of people? Why would he even be worried about the sin of another people? Why would he be in John 8 telling them that they could be made free from sin? They was never given the law to deal with sin. They was never given the promises of Christ to be made free from sin. You see what I'm saying? So the idea of the Pharisees not being our people destroys the whole idea of him being rejected of his own people, and who he came for. He's preaching the gospel to these people that they may be free from sin, and they are rejecting it like the scripture says it's supposed to happen. It did not say that the Edomites was going to reject him. In fact, it says if the word of God was preached to other nations, that they would receive it quickly. We are the stiff-necked and rebellious people. And that's all I'm gonna read on that. Joab is gonna get into the history of how these people came to be. So you take it away, Joab, whenever you're ready.
All right. Grace and peace to the brothers and sisters that just now joining us. What the brother was just going over. If the brothers and sisters who just came on or is going to watch it at a later time, the brother was going over some of the scriptures dealing with the Pharisees and how they rejected Christ and whatnot, and the chief priests and scribes and elders, and he was going over the scriptures showing that the Pharisees were Israelites and Paul himself was a Pharisee. So today's lesson, we're going to go over the history of where the Pharisees came from and how they came into power according from the jump from the Maccabees up into the New Testament, because you don't read about the Pharisees in the Old Testament. And then when you get into the New Testament, all of a sudden you got scribes, you got Pharisees, you got Sadducees. So people, like the brother said, a lot of people got questions of, well, who are these people? Where do they come from? You don't read about them in the Old Testament. So that's what we're here to do. Lord's word of the Spirit of the Most High, to bridge the gap, to look up this history, because a lot of it has to do with the Maccabees brothers and the Hasmonean dynasty, and from their rise to power after they revolted and got the independence from Greece and the Greeks. The Hasmoneans was leading Israel, and that goes into what? The curses of Jeconiah and Jehoiakim is what? That there shall be no more king of Judah that's going to sit on the throne, either in Judah or in Samaria. So doing what the Maccabees and doing all that, after they defeated the Greeks, these men were what? From the tribe of Levi. And they did what? They were ruling. And so from that, like I said, as from there, we have to understand from building up from this history, these men, these is where the Pharisees came from. Now, from the, like I said, it might have to be a two-parter, which actually, no, I'm going to take it back. It is going to be, and the West, we're going to finish either, like I said, later on in the week or next Sabbath. But from these men, the Hasmoneans, came the rise of the Pharisees. And what they started off with was true intentions to turn us back to the Torah and follow the Most High God. But later on down the line, as we got into the New Testament, somehow they got corrupted and went into folly, and they fell into corruption, right? Joining hand in hands with the Romans. So now we're going to read on the history and where it all began, seeming deeming fit that a lot of Israelites celebrated Hanukkah these last couple of weeks, and some celebrated it the month before. So for a lot of us, we already know the history of Hanukkah and where it came about. But now for this lesson, it's not going to be about Hanukkah. This is going to be actually the rise of the Maccabees brothers, also known as the Hasmonean dynasty, and them ruling Israel. So I'm going to start off in First Maccabees chapter 2 to where it all began with Mattathias. So if you all who don't have Apocrypha, Maccabees is in the Apocrypha, is the last books in the Apocrypha, which is part of the original King James Bible before it was removed. So First Maccabees chapter 2, and I'm starting at verse 1. In those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. And he had 5 sons: Joannan, called Caddis; Simon, called Thassi; Judas, who was called Maccabeus; Eleazar, called Avaran; and Jonathan, whose surname was Apphus. So this was Judah Maccabees, excuse me, this was Mattathias and his 5 sons, which was brought up from what? The Maccabean revolt against the Greeks. So from him, Mattathias, he started it, and then after he fell asleep, his son Judas Maccabees took over. And now from there, we got to understand the history of where this come from. So who was Mattathias? According to the Maccabees in the scripture, he was from the tribe of Levi. Because why? He was the sons of Joarib of Jerusalem, which was what? From there, he was the direct descendant of Phinehas, which was Aaron's grandson, the son of Eleazar, the high priest. I'm going to get that real quick. Right here it says, Mattathias, the father of Judas Maccabees, Eleazar, Simon, John, and Jonathan. Mattathias was from a rural priestly family from Modin. Like all fit priests, he served in the temple in Jerusalem. He was a son of Joannan. Now these are the Hebrew names. The grandson of Simeon, the Hasmonean. So that's where we get the name, the Hasmonean dynasty from Mattathias' grandfather Simeon. His name was Simeon Hasmonean. And the great grandson of Asmon of Hasmoneus, a Levite of the lineage of Joarib, being the 5th grandson of Idea, the son of Joarib, and the grandson of Joannan, in turn a descendant of Phinehas. And how do we know that he's the Mattathias is a descendant of Phinehas? Let's go to First Maccabees chapter 2, verse 54. And it says, Phinehas, our father, and being zealous and fervent, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. So right here, Mattathias is telling you that he's a descendant of Phinehas, and he was explaining the story to Judas and his brothers because he was getting ready to give up the ghost. So he laid Judas Maccabees in charge of the Maccabean revolt after he fell asleep with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of Modin. So I'm going to be reading, so bear with me as we get into the lesson. I'm going to be reading from a couple of books. I'm going to be reading from the book of Maccabees. I'm going to be Josephus a little bit. I'm going to be reading from the Who's Who Bible, and I'm going to be reading from a book called The Hellenistic Age, the World History of the Jews. So from here, we're going to start off, like I said, we wanted to go over the history of Mattathias and everything, and that we all know the history of Hanukkah, but this one is going to go a little deeper in how they came to rise to power after the events of Judas Maccabees when he put to flight the Greeks, and the starting from Jonathan. And this was we're going to start in First Maccabees chapter 7. But before I read that, I'm going to read in the book from the Jews. It's chapter 7 of the book. The first Hasmonean rulers, Jonathan and Simon. So these were Mattathias' sons, the brothers of Judah Maccabees. 60 BCE, Judah Maccabee fell in battle, and it appeared that all his victories and heroic deeds would go for nothing. Political and religious situation revert to what had been in BCE at the beginning of Demetrius the first. And the who's who first is, so we can get an understanding of what was going on in Israel at this time. First 150 BCE, King 62 to Judas, appointed a loyal and Hellenist. Now that's what we're going to read in a second. And sent a military force under his general to install. Part of the troops were left behind in Jerusalem as a garrison. During the first few years, Demetrius sent several more military expeditions against Judah, and later against his brother and successor. From 155 BCE, Demetrius tried to win over Judea in his struggle against Alexander Balis, who finally ousted him in 150 BC when in battle. So now we're going to read the history of that. So it says, in the year 160 BCE, Judah Maccabees fell in battle, and it appeared that all his victories and heroic deeds would go for nothing. As political and religious revert to what it had been in 162 BCE at the beginning of the reign of Demetrius the first. The Hellenizers here were the Jews that were synthetic to the Greeks' cause, who joined forces with the Greeks. They abandoned the religion of the Jews and went to follow the Greeks. Jerusalem, upheld by the spears of the troops of the Syrian king Caddis, the high priest, or his Hebrew name, maintained an office by the grace of Bacchides. Once again, privilege among the reputators of the covenant came to the fore, and all those who had opposed him, particularly the followers of Judah, were hunted down and destroyed. So this is going into the history of what was going on in the Maccabees. Now we're going to tie it into the actual scriptures in a little bit. Adherents remained steadfast in their loyalty. Just joined together in a small band and chose Jonathan as their leader. Mattathias will hold designated Simon, the oldest of the brothers, to succeed Judah, but differences appear to have arisen between Simon and Judah. Accordingly, Jonathan to lead them. The choice was a happy one, to be a courageous warrior, even though he was not the adored hero that Judah had been in battles. Nevertheless, it was not as a military commander that Jonathan excelled. Rather, he was outstanding in his grasp of the political situation and in his uncanny ability to exploit a situation to his advantage. Years of his rule, he gradually led the Judean state toward independence. And to the scriptures, and back up the scriptures to what this book is saying and what the who's who is saying in the scripture. First Maccabees chapter 7. During the time of Judas Maccabees chapter 7, all the way up to his death, and when Jonathan is going to succeed after him. And the 115th year, Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, departed from Rome and came up with a few men to a city of the east coast and reigned there. I have this Bible that has a biblical timeline all the way up to Christ's death and Paul's ministry, that Demetrius came and he took the power. It says 15, but this is the year when it says that, that's talking about the Hebrew year, but in the when we read, it's actually when it says 162 BCE, that's the year of the Greeks. 62 BCE, Demetrius the first, son of Seleucus the fourth, seizes the throne. Back to the Maccabees. In the 115th year, Demetrius the son of Seleucus departed from Rome and came up with a few men to a city of the sea coast and reigned there. And as he entered into the palace of his ancestors, so it was that his forces had taken Antiochus to bring them unto him. Wherefore, when he knew it, he said, faces. So his host slew them, was set up upon the throne of the kingdom. So what happened was what? He had Antiochus and Elias put to death, and from their death, as king from the Seleucid Empire. And it says, there came unto him all wicked and ungodly men of Israel, having alchemists who was desirous to be high priests for their captain. So at this time, these revolt, Demetrius I had just by killing Antiochus and Elias. There was wicked Israelites being what? Following after the Hellenized customs of the Greeks, and their leader at this time was a Levite by the name of Alchemist. And they accused the people to the king, saying, Judas and his brother have slain all thy friends and have driven us out of our own land. So they were setting up a scheme against the Maccabees, so they can be ruling Israel, because they knew that Judas and his brothers was doing what was right for Israel, but from greed and power, Israel, and he wanted to be the high priest. So now, therefore, send some men whom thou trusteth, and let him go and see what made among us and in the king's land, and let him punish them with all that aid them. Then the king chose Caddis, a friend of the king, who ruled beyond the flood, with the great man faithful to the king. And him he sent with that wicked alchemist, whom he made high priest, and commanded that he should take vengeance of the children of Israel. So what happened here was what? The alchemist went to the Demetrius to do something about Judas Maccabees and his brothers. And this is what Demetrius I did. He chose Caddis, a friend of the king, and from behind alchemist. So let's see who Caddis is in the Husu that's lining up with these scriptures. Caddis, he's a military commander under Seleucid kings Antiochus IV and Demetrius I. Leading general and governor of the western part of the Seleucid kingdom, expeditions into Judea to revolt. In 162 BCE, he established a garrison in Jerusalem. In BCE, he defeated the Maccabeans in the battle of Elisa, and Judas was killed. In 157 BCE, to round up the Jews under Jonathan, but fortified the area around Jerusalem. So let's read. Like I said, if I'm moving too fast, I apologize. There are like 4 different books. So it says, back into the book of the Hellenistic age, we're still in chapter 7. It says, at first, Jonathan's small band was naturally unable to fight the Syrians openly. Mattathias before him, launched his liberating operations with hit and run tactics. And from here, for the Maccabeans revolt, using Jonathan Maccabees, started what we call guerrilla warfare, which was hit the enemy, go hide somewhere, let the enemy come out, search for you, hide in another place, hit them again, hit their strong point, retreat, go to another part of the base. Guerrilla warfare is, and that's what the tactics that Judah Maccabees and his brother Jonathan and Simon, they all used to subdue the Greeks and the Syrians who they were fighting in the Maccabean revolt. And that's what we get today known as guerrilla warfare, and that's what a lot of armies adopted from the Maccabees. And it says, now and then he would swoop down on small Syrian detachments or on Jewish Hellenizers and villages and towns outside Jerusalem, where his opponents were not very strong or numerous. On one occasion, Caddis persuaded Jonathan and his men in the wilderness of Tekiah, east of Bethlehem, The Jews planned to leave all the possessions in the land of who, unlike the other Arabs, were friendly to the Hasmoneans and sent a small detachment under Jonathan's brother, Joannan, the third living son of Mattathias, to escort the property to the Neapolitan cities near Medea and Transjordan. Now when I'm reading this book because this book it ties in to the Maccabees and is giving you the history of what was going on as I read the scripture. That's why I'm reading this book. Now Medea and Transjordan, the Arab tribe of the sons of Ambri, attacked and killed Joannan and his men and plundered all the property. To avenge the blood of his brothers, so I'm jumping ahead because that's later on in the scripture. So I'm going to come back and read this part, but that's in chapter that's in chapter 9. So I'm going to stick and read Maccabees real quick. So it says, and the king chose Caddis, a friend of the king, who ruled beyond was a great man in the kingdom and faithful to the king. He sent with that wicked alchemist whom he made high priest. So Caddis made alchemist the high priest of Israel, which he wasn't supposed to be the high priest, and it's going to explain the priesthood. So they departed and came with great power into the land of Judea, sent messengers to Judas and his brother with peaceable words deceitfully. Now this is before Judas Maccabees was killed in battle. The history of, like I said, building up and taking power of Israel, it all started with the death of Judas Maccabees, and from there his successor. So it says, but they gave no heed to their words, for they saw that they were come with a great power. Then did there assemble unto alchemists and Caddis a company of scribes to require justice, and were the first among the children of Israel that sought peace of them. For said they, one that is the priest of the seed of Aaron is come with this army, and he will do us no wrong. They're speaking of alchemists. So that's what alchemists is using his lineage to try to attain the highest priesthood. He's saying, I want to be high priest because I am of the seed and lineage of Aaron. I'm one of the sons of Aaron. So why can't I be high priest? And what was going on? So let's see. For they said, one that is the priest of the seed of Aaron is come with this army, and he will do us no wrong. So we spake unto them peaceably, and swear unto them, saying, we will procure the harm neither of you nor your friends. And then that goes with what? Psalms, you know where it's at in Psalms? I think it's Psalms 51. It says they spake unto peaceably. The words were smooth as butter, but their hearts, the words were smooth as butter, but in their hearts it was war. Inwardly, but in without was war. Go ahead.
55.
Yeah.
So 55 maybe.
Yeah, hold on. Let me see if I get it real quick. Hold on. Yeah, Psalms 55 and 21 that said the words of his mouth was smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. So that's what was going on. They tried to come up to them speaking smooth sayings, talking about peace, but inwardly they wanted to dispose of Judas Maccabees and his brother. So this was going on with alchemists and Caddis, and eventually the true nature is going to come out. It says what? Whereupon they believed him, howbeit he took of them 80 men and slew them in one day, according to the words which he wrote. So right after he came to them peaceably, I believe he took with 80 is about 300 men and slew them. He killed them. So it says what? Oh no, 80. Is it 300 or is it 60? 60? I can't remember. But okay, but he took a lot of men. And he killed either 60 or 80. I always forget how to count these things. And he says what? The flesh of thy saints what they have cast out, and their blood have they shed round about Jerusalem, and there was none to bury them. Wherefore the fear and dread of them fell upon all the people, who said, there is neither truth nor righteousness in them, for they have broken the covenant and the oath that they made. This is talking about Caddis and alchemists. And after this removed Caddis from Jerusalem and pitched his tent in Bezeth, where he sent and took away of the men that had forsaken him, and certain of the people also. when he had slain them, he cast them into the great pit. Then committed he the country to Alchemists and left him a power to aid him. So Maccabeus went to the king, but Alchemists contended for the high priesthood, and unto him restored all such as troubled the people, who after they had gotten the land of Judea into their power, did much hurt in Israel. Saw all the mischief that Alchemists and his company had done among the Israelites, even above the heathen, because why? He deceived the heathens. And he went out into all the coast of Judea round about, and took vengeance of them that had revolted from him, so that they durst no more go forth into the city. On the other side, when Alchemists saw that Judas and his company had gotten the upper hand, and knew that it was not able to abide their force, he went again to the king and said all the worst of them that he could. So he's just going back and forth to these heathens and trying to dispose of Judas Maccabees. Because why? He knew that he was a threat to him, and he could not stand him being in power. So because why? He wanted the priesthood, of which eventually he was granted the priesthood. He became high priest. But we're going to see what happened to this wicked Israelite that obtained the priesthood not according to the course of the Most High, which he was supposed to. So it says, so this is what happened. This is what Alchemist did when he kept complaining to the king. And this is what Demetrius squashed Judas Maccabees. Then the king sent Nicanor, one of his honorable princes, a man that bare deadly hate unto Israel, with commandment to destroy the people. He came to Jerusalem with a great force, and sent unto Judas and his brethren deceitfully with friendly words, saying, let there be no battle between me. So there goes again that Psalm 55. They came speaking peaceably, but war was in their hearts. Therefore to Judas, and they saluted one another peaceably. Enemies were prepared to take away Judas by violence, which thing after it was known to Judas, to wit, that when he came to him with deceit, he was so afraid of him and would see his face no more. So Judas, he was using wisdom. It wasn't battle. He was smart enough to know, hey, I'm about to walk into a trap. Lead my army into this trap, because that was wise. They had the spirit of discernment. It says Nicanor also, when he saw that his counsel was discovered, went out to fight against Judas beside about 5,000 men, and the rest fled into the city of David. Nicanor up to Mount Sion of the priests, and certain of the to salute him peaceably, and to shew him the burnt sacrifice that was offered to the king. So now Israel tried to make another peace offering to these Gentiles, and see what happened. They don't care about us. All they care about, they have war, and when they got mission, they're going out to do it. That's why the scriptures say what? The hands of war and the weapons. That's what these other nations have been doing. So it says what? He mocked them and laughed at them and abused them shamefully, and spake proudly in his wrath, saying, unless Judas and his host be now delivered into my hands, if I ever will come again in safety, I will burn up this place. And with that, he went out in a great rage. So he threatened them, saying, if you don't deliver in this band of people that's rising up to revolt against, I'll come back and burn the city. The city of what? The city of David. He's going to burn up Jerusalem if they don't hand him Judas Maccabees. Entered in and stood before the altar in the temple, weeping and saying, thou, O Lord, didst choose this house to be called by thy name, and to be a house of prayer and petition for thy people, this man and his host, and let them fall by the sword. Remember the blasphemies, and suffer them not to continue any longer. Out of Jerusalem, and pitched his tents and Beth Horon of Syria met him. But Judas pitched in Adasa with 3,000 men, and there he prayed, saying, O Lord, when they that were sent from the king of the Assyrians, thine angel went out and smote 180,500 of them. Where thou this host before us this day, that the rest may know that he hath spoken blasphemously against thy sanctuary, and judge thou him according to his wickedness. So now what? Judas Maccabees and army being in the spirit, they prayed to the Most High. And they said, just like a Syrian king that went out before us, our ancestors, do the same to this man. And let's see what happened to Nicanor. So First Maccabees 7:43. So the 13th day of the month Adar, which is the first of the Hebrew month, as we call it, Adar, the host joined battle, but Nicanor's host was discomfited, and he himself was first slain in the battle. So when they went to war against Judas Maccabees, that was killed. Go ahead.
Adar is the 12th month, brother. I just want to let you.
You're right. My bad. You're right.
No, just before somebody be like,
yeah, you're right. And Adar, my apologies. Adar, or Bib is the first month when we celebrate Passover. I'm going fast. So Adar is the 12th month. So during the 12th month, on the 13th day of the 12th month, when Nicanor, his army was defeated. So when Nicanor's host saw that he was slain, they cast away their weapons and fled. After them a day's journey from Adasa unto Gazaria, after them with their trumpets, whereupon they came forth out of all the towns of Judea round about and closed them in, so that they, turning back upon them that persuaded them, were all slain with the sword, and not one of them was left. So Nicanor and all his army was slain. They was all put to death for disrespecting Judas Maccabees, the temple, and the Most High, and the priests of the Most High. Most High have them put to death. Afterwards, they took the spoils and the prey and smote off Nicanor's head. So after they looted them and they robbed the bodies of the treasure, they took off they cut off Nicanor's head, which he stretched out so proudly. So the hand that he used to boast and proud and saying, "Bring me, I'm going to do this to the temple, I'm going to burn it down." They cut that off. They cut off his hand, and see what they did with it. Which he stretched out so proudly and brought them away and hanged them up toward Jerusalem. So they hung up his head and they hung up his hand for what? Everybody else to say that this is what's going to happen to y'all when y'all what? God in the temple. For this cause the people rejoiced greatly, and they kept that day a great day of gladness. Moreover, they ordained to keep yearly this day, being the 13th of Adar. So on the 13th month, on the 13th day, they what? Celebrate the destruction of Nicanor, which is a feast day for us to keep now. This, the land of Judea was a rest of little while. Now Judas had heard of the fame of the Romans. So now we're going to get a little history of the Roman occupation in Israel. But this occupation at first was peaceable. But then later on down the line, we're going to see that Rome started setting up their benefactors and governors. Maccabees made a pact with Rome, but at first it was a peaceable pact. And this is how we're going to see how the beginning of how Rome entered into now Judas, First Maccabees chapter 8. Now Judas had heard of the fame of the Roman, mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all that join themselves unto them, and make a liege of amity of all that came unto them, and that they were men of great value. It was told of him of these wars and noble acts which they had done among the Galatians, and how they had conquered them, tribute, and what they had done in the country of Spain, for the winning of the mines of the silver and gold which is there. Policy and patience they had conquered all, and that by their policy and patience they had conquered all the place, though it were very far from them, and the kings also that came against them from the uttermost part of the earth, till they all had discomfited them, and given them a great overthrow, so that the rest did give them tribute every year. Besides this, how they had discomfited and battled Philip and Perseus, king of the Kittims, which others had lifted up themselves against them, had overcame them. How also Antiochus, the great king of Asia, that came against them in battle, having 120 elephants with horsemen and chariots, and a very great army, was discomfited by them. So the Romans was just going around slaughtering everybody, subduing all these nations. Now Judas Maccabees, being the militant leader and the political leader that he is, instead of going betting his odds and rolling the dice or going against Rome as well, he went and made a pact with them, and they became friends with each other. They made a covenant with each other that Rome is going to defend the Jews when the Jews go to war, and the Jews are going to defend Rome when Rome go to war. So now, building up into this history, now we can start to understand, bridge together the gap from the Old to the New Testament, because when you get in the New Testament, Israel is under Roman occupancy. So we're like, okay, how did that happen? Where's this written at? It's right here in the Maccabees. This is bridging the gap between the Old and the New Testament, because in the New Testament, like I said, we're already under Roman occupancy. And this is the beginning of how Rome started to come into Israel. So what's that? Verse 7, and how they took him alive and coveted in him that he and such as reigned after him should pay a great tribute. So they did what? They kept him alive, and to do what? For him and all the other kings after him to pay tribute. Pay tribute to who? To Rome. So they kept these kings alive so they can pay tribute and build up the power of Rome. Now it says what? And give hostages that which was agreed upon. And the country of India and Media and Lydia and all the other goodliest countries which they took of him and gave to King Emunes. Moreover, how the Grecians had determined to come and destroy them, and they, having knowledge thereof, sent against them a certain captain, and fighting with them slew many of them, and carried away captives their wives and their children, and spoiled them, and took possessions of their lands, and pulled down their stronghold, and brought them to their servant, and brought them to be the servants until this day. When the Greeks rose up against the Romans, that's where you get the Roman Greco era from, because they merged into one, because Rome assimilated into the Greeks once they conquered them, and it became the Roman Greco area. And that's what the era that was the era that was going on in the time of Christ and his disciples. It was the Roman Greco era. And that's why it says, and they brought them to be their servants unto this day. So the Greeks were tributaries unto the Rome. They would have servitude and had debt to the Romans. And it was told by him besides how they destroyed and brought under their dominion all other kingdoms and isles that is any time resisted them. But with their friends, so it said everybody they opposed them, they were going to war and they're going to subdue them. But this is what they did to the ones who made peace and a pact with them. But with their friends and such as relied upon them, they kept amity. And they that had conquered kingdoms both far and nigh, and so much as all that heard of their name were afraid of them. Also that whom they would help to a kingdom, those reign, and also that whom they would help to a kingdom, those reign, and whom again they displaced. Finally, that they were greatly exalted. None of them wore a crown, nor was clothed in purple, to be magnified thereby. So these Romans wearing fancy clothes like the Greeks and the Syrians and the Persians, they didn't start off putting crowns upon their head. They were just conquering people and saying, okay, if you want to join us, cool. If not, then you are our enemy. And they didn't start off wearing crowns, and they didn't put purple garments on like the Greeks and stuff did. But that's going to come later. And when they started setting up their government, the Senate and whatnot. So it says what? Yet for all this, none of them wore a crown, nor was clothed in purple, to be magnified thereby. Moreover, how they had made for themselves a senate house, wherein 320 men sat in council daily, consulting always for the people, to the end that they might be well ordered. And this is where the U.S. bases their government off. A lot of stuff we base off of Rome. That's why a lot of people say America is the extension of Rome, is Babylon the Great, and all this stuff, Babylon, the Great Whore of Babylon, because we base everything off of Rome. Washington, D.C., the monuments, a lot of the structures that's built in D.C. is actually based off of ancient Roman structures. When you Google the Senate House in Rome, you can Google a lot of the other, I forgot what the buildings are, but a lot of the buildings that they have for the government and Senate is when you Google it, it mirrors the images that we have here in America in DC. It says what? And they that committed their government to one man every year, who ruled over all the country. And this is what America bases off of what? Because in Rome they had the governor, he ruled in the Senate, and they had a Caesar that ruled over everything. Now in America, you get elected and we have a president, and he rules over the whole country with the government behind him. That's how Rome's structure was set up. And now this is how Rome's structure is set up. That's how America, we based everything off of their government. And that all were obedient to that one, and that there was neither envy nor emulation among them. Of these things Judas chose Epolamus, the son of John, the son of Apphus, and Jason, the son of Eleazar, and sent them to Rome to make a league of enmity and confederacy with them. So now Judas said, well, these men, they powerful, they subduing countries, they destroying nations and making them subject. So instead of making them our enemy, let's make a covenant with them, and to treat them that they would take the yoke from them. For they saw that the kingdom of the Grecians did oppress Israel with servitude. They went therefore to Rome, which was a very great journey, and came into the Senate, where they spake and said, Judas Maccabees and his brethren, the people of the Jews, have sent us unto you to make a confederacy and peace with you, that we might be registered with your confederates and friends. That matter pleased the Romans well. Of the epistle or the letter which the Senate wrote back in the tables of brass and sent to Jerusalem, that there might have been a memorial of peace and confederacy. So now I'm about to read. This is the letter. Go ahead.
Here's them right quick. So just you see in here in the Maccabees that what was our relationship, the Jews' relationship with Rome, Israel's relationship with Rome, did not. It began with confederacy and with peace, so that we would have a defense against the Greeks, right? That's what it's saying?
Right. Yeah, basically making a friendship.
Right. So when you get into the Gospels, you see somehow it has changed, and it appears that, you know, Rome is oppressing now. You know, when you read through it now, the people are afraid of Rome. And the Pharisees is using the Roman Caesar, you know, to scare people. So are you going to go against Caesar? They're asking Christ, is you going to go against Caesar and not pay taxes and all that stuff like that? So at some point, it went from them, you know, being confederate with us, being at peace with us, to now them having dominion over us. So just, you know, because we're going over the history, just pay attention to that. Go ahead, brother. You there?
Yeah, my bad. I went to drink real quick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I get something to drink. I was thirsty. So, First Maccabees chapter 8 and 23. This is the letter that the Romans wrote back to the Jews. Good success be to the Romans and to the people of the Jews by sea and by land forever. The sword also and enemy be far from them. If there come first any war upon the Romans, or if any of their confederates throughout all their dominion, Jews shall help them. And as this time shall be appointed with all their heart, neither shall they give anything unto them that make war upon them, or aid them with victuals, weapons, money, or ships, as it seemed good unto the Romans, but they shall keep their covenants without taking anything thereof. In the same manner also, if war came first upon the nation of the Jews, and with all their heart, according as the same time appointed them, neither shall victuals be given to them that take part against them, or weapons, or monies, or ships, as they have seemed good to the Romans, but they shall keep their covenants, and that without deceit. According to these articles, did the Romans make a covenant with the people of the Jews. If hereafter the one party or the other shall think meet to add or diminish or anything, they may do it at their pleasures, and whatsoever they shall add or take away shall be ratified. And as touching of the evils that Demetrius doeth to the Jews, we have written unto him, saying, wherefore hast thou made thy yoke heavy upon our friends and confederate the Jews? If therefore thy complain any more, if Therefore they complain any more against thee, we will do them justice and fight with thee by sea and land. So now they did what? They came, they threatened Demetrius and said, okay, you messing with the Jews, now you messing with us, now we got to come see you. And Demetrius, he knows about the Romans, so he's like, oh man, what am I going to do now? Because why? The Romans was over here destroying everybody. They already put the Jews, they already put the Grecians into subjection. Spain, they were up in Britain, India, Central Asia, Middle Asia, East Asia. They were doing everywhere. They were subduing all these other countries. And now the Romans saying, you got a problem with the Jews, you got a problem with us. Now, chapter 9. Furthermore, when Demetrius heard that Nicanor and his host was slain in battle, he sent Caddis, an alchemist, into the land of Judea the second time, and with them the chief strength of his host, who went forth by the way that leadeth to Galgea, and pitched their tents before Masaloth, which is in Arbela. And after they had won it, they slew much people. Also, the first month of the 152nd year, they encamped before Jerusalem, from whence they removed and went to Berea, which 20,000 footmen and 2,000 horsemen. Now Judas had pitched his tent, and Eleazar and 3,000 chosen men with him. So now it says what? So now who seen the multitude of the other army be so great were so afraid. So now this, the beginning of chapter 9, this is where, unfortunately, the Judas Maccabees and his, most of his army met their demise at the hands of his army. So this is what's going on. So when Judas therefore saw that his host slipped away and that the battle pressed upon him, he was sore troubled in mind and much distressed, for that he had no time to gather them together. 3,000 men, which was on the other side of the town, he couldn't get to them. And it said here that he only had about, with him, he only had about 800 men with him. It said they had what? They went with 20,000 footmen and 2,000 horsemen. So they had a big advantage over Judas Maccabees. They had 20,000 footmen and 2,000 horsemen. Judas Maccabees only had 800 men with him. Nevertheless, unto them that remained, he said, let us arise and go up against our enemies, if peradventure, if perhaps we may be able to fight with them. But they dehorted him, saying, we shall never be able. Let us now rather save our lives, return with our brethren, and fight against them, for we are but a few. Then Judas said, God forbid that I should do this thing and flee away from them. If our time be come, let us die manfully for our brethren, and let us not stain our honor. So he said, I'm not going to run. If our time is to die, then so be it. Because why? He doesn't want to put a stain on his name to be a coward. He did so much for the children of Israel and for the Jews and fighting in the Maccabean war. He didn't want to go out being a coward. So he said, no, I'm not going to retreat and get these men. I'm not going to run from battle because I'm Judas Maccabees. I have a reputation to hold. It's like the scriptures say, what? A good name is more precious than gold and silver. So he said, I'm going to maintain my name. And the ones who with me, you all fight for me, they're going to have a good name with me. We're not going to go out as cowards. We're going to die as men. So he says what? Then Judas said, God forbid that I should do this thing and flee away from them. If our time be come, let us die manfully for our brethren in our honor. With that, the host of Caddis removed out their tents and stood over against them, the horsemen being divided into two troops, and their slingers and archers going before the host. And they that marched in the forward were all mighty men. Them surrounded, and then after they had them surrounded, they set their mighty men, the foot soldiers, to close in on Judas Maccabees. As for Caddis, he was in the right wing. So the host drew near on the two parts and sounded their trumpets. They also of Judas' side, even they sounded their trumpets also, so that the earth shook at the noise of the armies, and the battle continued from morning until night. So what happened with Judas Maccabees when they sounded the trumpet? That's according to the law and Numbers. When you go to war, you're supposed to sound the trumpet from the Levites, Numbers 10. Now when Judas perceived that Caddis and the strength of his army were on the right side, he took with him all the hardy men, who discomfited the right wing and pursued them into the mount. And when they were left, when they of the left wing saw they of the right wing were discomfited, they followed upon Judas and those that were with him hard at the heels from behind. So what happened? Judas Maccabees, Judas Maccabees and his men that was fighting with him, a man of 800, put these other mighty men to flight, and they were chasing after him. And when the left wing saw that he put Bacchides and his men to flight, they followed Judas Maccabees. So what happened was you had at the right wing Judas Maccabees and his men in the middle, and you had the left wing coming behind them. So now what they did, they closed up around Judas Maccabees, and that's how they ended up trapping them, as we read in the scriptures. So they were trapped. They had the right wing, which is Bacchides' men, Judas Maccabees in the middle pursuing them, and then behind them they had the left wing. So they enclosed and camped around Judas Maccabees in them. So it says, whereupon there was a sore battle, and so much as many were slain on both parts. Judah also was killed, and the remnant fled. Then Jonathan and Simon took Judas their brother and buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers in Modin. Moreover, they bewailed him, and all Israel made great lamentation for him, and mourned many days, saying, how is the valiant man fallen that delivered Israel? Things concerning Judas and his wars and his greatness, they are not written. So it says, even all his deeds, just like it says in the book of John about Christ, all his deeds wasn't even written in the Maccabees. He did so much things, it couldn't even be contained for what he did. The same thing they wrote about Christ in John. They said he did so much stuff that it would take the whole world to write about, fill up all the books in the world to fill what Christ did. And the same thing about Judas. And it says, now after the death of Judas, the wicked began to put forth their heads in the coast of Israel. So after his death, after the collapse of his army, to put their fortresses and their sentries back into surrounding the cities of Israel. And there arose up all such as wrought iniquity. So all wicked men came about after Judas' death. Wicked men of Israel came about and to encamp around Israel. In those days also there was a very great famine, by reason whereof the country revolted and went with them. So a lot of men, Greeks, because there was a famine in Israel. So they saw that nothing was getting done on the Jews' part, so they went and joined themselves with the Greeks because of this famine. Then Bacchides chose the wicked men and made them lords over the country. So the men that betrayed their own people, Israel, he made them lords over the country. And they made inquiry and searched for Judas' friends and brought them unto Bacchides, who took vengeance of them and used them despitefully. So they rounded up the men that was loyal to Judas Maccabees, and they did what? He put them to work. So there was a great affliction in Israel, not since the time that a prophet was not seen among them. For this cause all Judah's friends came together and said unto Jonathan, Judas died, we have no man like unto him to go forth against our enemies and Bacchides and against them of our nation that are adversaries to us. Now therefore we have chosen thee this day to be our prince and captain in his stead, that thou mayest fight our battles. I read earlier that the beginning of the book of chapter 7, the first Hasmonean rulers. This was the situation that was going on. Judas Maccabees had just been killed, and Jonathan arose in his stead, and he took his place, and he started to become the political power, the commander of the army. He did all these things after his brother was put to death. So that's what I read in the first and 2 pages of the book, and that's what lined up with the scripture. That's what's going on. I wanted to read that to get into the rise of Jonathan, and from Jonathan, his brother Simon, and this is how the Hasmoneans came into power Israel. So it says, now therefore we have chosen, so this is verse 30, 1 Maccabees 9 and 30. Now therefore we have chosen thee this day to be our prince and captain in his stead, and thou mayest fight our battles. Upon this, Jonathan upon him at this time, and rose up instead of his brother Judah. But when Bacchides gave knowledge thereof, he sought for to slay him. Then Jonathan and Simon his brother and all that were with him, perceiving that, fled into the wilderness of Thassi. and pitched their tents by the waters of the pool Asphar, which when Caddis understood, he came near to Jordan with all his host upon the Sabbath day. Now Jonathan has sent his brother John, a captain, to the people to pray his friends, the Mattathias, that they may leave with them their carriage, which was come. But the children of Jambri came out of Madaba and took John and all that he had and went their way with it. And this came word to Jonathan and Simon his brother, that the children of Jambri made a great marriage and were bringing the bride from with a great train, as being the daughter of one of the great princes of Canaan. Therefore they remembered John their brother and went up and hid themselves under the covert of the mountain, where they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, there was much ado and great carriage, and the bridegroom came forth, and his friends and brethren, to meet them with drums and instruments of music. Then Jonathan and they that were with him rose against them from the place where they lay in ambush. So this is that guerrilla warfare again, and made a slaughter of them in such sort as many fell down dead, and the remnant fled into the mountains, and they all took their spoils. And thus the marriage turned into mourning, and the noise of the melody into lamentation. So when they had avenged fully the blood of their brother, they turned again to the marsh of Jordan. So what happened was, to inquire about the people, the Nabathites, and they took him and slew him. So let's read about that in chapter 7, page 184 of the Hellenistic age, the first Hasmonean rulers. The Jews planned to leave all the possessions in the land of the Nabateans, who, unlike the other Arabs, were friendly to the Hasmoneans. All detachment under Jonathan's brother, the third living son of Mattathias, to escort the property to Nabatean cities. So he was cargo to the cities, and they took him and kidnapped him and killed him. To avenge the blood of his brother and comrades, excuse me, I'll skip the part. In Transjordan, the Arab tribe of the sons of Ambri attacked and killed Joannan and his brothers and plundered all the property. So instead of being peaceful and dealing with him peaceably, they robbed them and killed him. But 5 sons, only 2 were left. So let's see. Let's go back to his sons and see who was put to death. The Maccabean wars. So we had what?
We had bad before you got to the 2 sons being left.
Go ahead.
I said it broke up real bad before you got to the 2 sons being left.
Oh,
yeah, just a little piece of it. I don't know how, like it just got held back or something.
All right, I'll read it. Do you know?
It wasn't that long.
Here in Transjordan, the Arab tribe of the sons of Ambri attacked and killed and his men and plundered all the property. To avenge the blood of his brother and his comrades, Jonathan fell upon the sons of Ambri as they were celebrating the wedding of one of their leading tribesmen, and not only recovered their own property, but even seized a great deal of booty. But of Mattathias, 5 sons, only 2 are left. As he had Joannan, called Caddis, Simon, called Thassi, Judas, which is called Maccabees, and Eleazar, and Jonathan, whose surname was Apphus. Joannan was just killed, we read here. And we had Judas Maccabees killed in battle. Eleazar was killed in battle. So now the only man that was left of the sons was Jonathan. To see how much of an important role these men played in shaping the structure of. From back into the book, it says his band in order to put an end to their raids, advancing on them as they were returning from their battle against the sons of Ampri. He blocked their way near the fords of Jordan and tried to force them to fight. Were no match for the larger and stronger Syrian army. Jonathan avoided the encounter by ordering his men to swim across the Jordan. At some point, Syrians, it says 160 BCE. Where the first of devoted Horan, and to commission a Syrian garrison in each adherence to join and strengthen the garrison which he controlled by the Hellenizers, which was outside. So now, and Gezer during the month of ER in 159 BCE, the second month, alchemists acted in the way that aroused widespread anger among the people. Although not an extreme Hellenizer, he began to tear down, separating the inner and outer courts of the temple, a wall which was regarded as the work of the prophets. Soon after inaugurating the work, according to 1 Maccabees 9, we're going to read in a little bit, Alchemist was stricken with, his body became paralyzed, and he died in great pain. In ancient tradition, the alchemist died seeking repentance. Read now in the Maccabees, 1 Maccabees 9. Bacchum is heard there Sabbath day into the banks of Jordan with a great power. Then John comes up now. This the whole battle is before us and behind us, and the water of that side, the marsh likewise, and wood. Neither is there a place for us to turn aside. Now to heaven, that ye may be delivered from the hand of your enemies. So they didn't do anything other than always required of high to deliver, to say by our own will we're going to do this, like with his brother Judas the Maccabees. They relied on the Most High to the enemies. When Jonathan stretched back from him, so they were hand upon in Jericho, and Emus and Betharon and Bethel at the with high.
No, this thing ain't doing nothing but skip.
Say something.
And this thing ain't
the whole
doing
time
nothing but skipping.
Yeah, skip like the whole thing that I read.
Yeah.
So I just read it again. Start from first one.
So how's it doing all right now?
I have no idea. I'm bringing out the history they don't want us to know. Now I'll start again. Verse 43. Now when Caddis heard that came on the Sabbath day into the banks of Jordan with a great power, then Jonathan said to his company, let us go up now and fight for our lives, for it standeth not with us this day, as in time past. For behold, the battle is before us and behind us, and the water of Jordan on this side and that side, and wood, neither is there place for us to turn aside. Wherefore cry ye now unto heaven, that ye may be delivered from the hand of your enemies. So notice at this time, they never put trust in themselves. They always did what? Relied on the Most High to deliver them from the hand of the enemies. And that's what they did at this time. That they joined battle, and Jonathan stretched forth his hand to smite Caddis, but he turned back from him. So they had the upper hand on Caddis and his man, and Jonathan was getting ready to kill him, but he turned and ran. Then Jonathan and they that were with him leapt into Jordan and swam over into the further bank. Howbeit the other passed not over Jordan unto them. So there were slain of Caddis' side that day about 1,000 men. Afterward returned Caddis to Jerusalem and repaired the strong cities in Judea, the fort in Jericho and Emmaus and Horon and Bethel and Timnathia and Parthonian and Taphnon. These did he strengthen the high walls with gates and with bars. So excuse me if I butchered these names, but these are the Greek rendering of the Jews' cities. And in them he set a garrison that they might work malice upon Israel. He fortified also the city of Bethshura. We just read this in the book. And the tower, and put forces of them and provisions of victuals. Besides, he took the chief's men's sons in the country for hostages and put them into the tower at Jerusalem to be kept. Moreover, in the 153rd year, in the second month, Alchemist, well, that's what we just read in the book. In the second month, Alchemist commanded that the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary should be pulled down. He pulled down also the works of the prophets, and as begun to pull down, even at that time was Alchemist plagued, and with his enterprises hindered, for his mouth was stopped, and he was taken with the palsy. So he could no more speak anything, nor give order concerning this house. So Alchemist died at that time with great torment. Now when Bacchus saw that Alchemist was dead, he returned to the king, whereupon the land of Judea was in rest 2 years. Then all the ungodly men held a council, saying, Behold, Jonathan and his company are at ease, and dwell without care. Now therefore we shall bring Bacchus hither all in one night. So they all went and consulted with him. Then removed he and came with a great host, and sent letters privily to his adherents in Judea, that they should take Jonathan and those who were with him. Howbeit they could not, because their counsel was known unto them. Wherefore they took of the men of the country, there were authors of them that mischief, about 50 persons, and slew them. Afterward Jonathan and Simon and they that were with him got them away to Bethbasi, which is in the wilderness, and they repaired the decays thereof and made it strong. So they were doing what? They were, excuse me, one second. So they were hiding out in the wilderness at this time, and from them hiding out in the wilderness, they were building up the strong places of the cities in this, so they can hide out there from the armies. When Caddis knew, he gathered together all his hosts and sent word unto them that were of Judea. Then went he and laid siege against Bathbasi, and they fought against it a long season and made engines of war. But Jonathan left his brother Simon in the city, himself into the country, and with a certain number went he forth, and he smote Odenarches and his brethren and the children of Hasmonean in their tent. And when he began to smite them and came up with his forces, Simon and his companies went up out of the against Bacchus for them, and they afflicted him sore, for his counsel and his travail was in vain. Jonathan and Simon, they parted ways. Jonathan went out to one side and smote a lot of the enemies of Israel, and Simon, his brother, Caddis and his army head on, and they dealt much damage these Greeks' armies, and we and fought against Bacchus, who was discomfited by them, and they afflicted him sore, for his counsel and his travail was in vain. Wherefore he was very wroth at the wicked man that gave him counsel, and came into the country, and so much as he slew many of them, and proposed to return into his own country. Jonathan had knowledge, he sent ambassadors unto him, and to the end he should make peace with him. The prisoners, his butt handed to him in war, one side from Jonathan and the other side from Simon. He was dealt great losses, so he accepted a peace treaty between Jonathan. And which thing he accepted, and he did according to his demands, and swear unto him that he would never do him harm all the days of his life. He had restored unto him the prisoners that he had taken aforetime out of the land of Judea, went his way into his own land, neither came into any more into the borders. Thus the sword ceased from Israel. But Jonathan dwelt at Maccabeus and began to govern the people, and he destroyed the ungodly man out of Israel. So during this peace treaty, they were at peace, and the sword ceased from Israel. They had peace for a long time, and Jonathan became the governor of Israel. He rounded up all the Hellenizers. He rounded up all the Hellenizers, the sympathizers of the Grecians who accepted the Greek customs, and he destroyed them out of Israel, meaning he put them to death. Now as we go into chapter 10, you got anything to add before I go to the next chapter? So now as we go into chapter 10, we're going to see a new king arise, and from his ascension, we're going to see Jonathan's power wax great and great, and we're going to see how much authority Jonathan had in Israel and why these other nations feared him, and as he became the ruler of Israel at this time, because he was the governor of Israel. Which again brings back what I said earlier about the curse of Jehoiakim and Jeconiah, that there's going to be no kings, no more sitting on the throne of Israel. And that came to pass because why? After that, there was no more kings sitting on the throne of David, or there's no more kings in the northern kingdom of Israel. With that, because when you read about it in Jeremiah, when you read about it in Haggai, Zerubbabel, he should have been a king, but he was governor of Israel. And then we as we get into the New Testament, as we see Christ's father Joseph, he technically should have been the king of Israel at that time, because he was a direct descendant of Solomon. But what? It was Herod that was ruling. He was set up by the Romans. And as we the Maccabees at this time, during the Maccabean revolt and the time of the Grecians, the Maccabees was ruling Israel, but they weren't calling themselves kings either. They were calling themselves the governors, and eventually to the high priesthood office, and we're going to read about that next. So I'm going to read from the book again, and then we're going to go back into the Maccabees and read chapter 10, how this all fits into the book, because the book no more depth of the history, so we can understand that the scriptures is covering it, but the book is going into a little more depth and actually the history of what was going on and what built up or led into it. So, and this is still chapter 7. For 7 years after Alchemist's unnatural death, 159 and 153 BCE, there was no high priest in the Jerusalem temple. These are the 7 years without a high priest, to which Josephus, now we're going to go into the book of Josephus in a second, when he speaks of the period between Alchemist and Jonathan, son of Mattathias, in another place. However, Josephus says that Jonathan donned the garments of the high priest 4 years after the death of his brother Judah, for there had been no high priest during this time. The source of this contradiction lies in the fact that, according to Josephus, Alchemist died, having been high priest for 4 years. Immediately after Nicanor was killed, Judah then acceded to the high priesthood. Further on, Josephus states that Judah Maccabees had held the high priesthood for 3 years when he died. It is these 3 years that Josephus subtracted from the 7 years which elapsed between Alchemist and Jonathan. It is even more accurate to say that there was no real high priest in Jerusalem for 7 years. So when it's saying that there was no priest in years, it's not saying that there was no high priest. It was saying that there was no priest that was supposed to be in office according to the seed of Aaron, because Alchemist usurped the priesthood as high priest, as well as Judas Maccabees was proclaimed to be high priest because of his valiant acts. So now let's go into the book of Josephus and read about, because let's just say a lot of people say, oh, Josephus got a lot of bones and a lot of stuff is not right according to history. But when he actually break it down, this is what Josephus is saying during those 7 years of between Alchemist and Jonathan becoming high priest. Josephus, book 10 first, and we're going to read about, because this, they said these were the contradictions. Josephus have 237. So we're going to read that real quick. It says, this was one I want. Yep. Chapter 10, verse 237. Give me a second, my bad. I forgot to highlight this page. Yeah, I had to read the I'll come back to this one. I forgot to highlight this one. So it says, and I'll read the other one in chapter 13. Book 13, until I find the other one, verse 46. Okay, so it says, book 13 of the book of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 13. It says, I'm gonna start at chapter number 43. When Alexander knew what promises Demetrius had made Jonathan, and withal knew his courage and what great things he had done when he fought the Macedonians, and besides what hardships he had undergone by the means of Demetrius and of Caddis, the general of Demetrius' army, he told his friends that he could not at present time find anyone else that might afford him better assistance than Jonathan, who was both courageous against his enemies and had particular hatred against Demetrius, as having both suffered many hard things from him and acted hard among the things against him. If therefore they were of opinion that they should make of the friend against Demetrius, it was more for their advantage to invite him to assist them now at another time. It being therefore determined by him and his friends to send to Jonathan, he wrote to him this epistle: King Alexander, to his brother Jonathan, sendeth greeting. We have long heard of thy courage and thy fidelity, and for that reason we sent to thee to make thee a league of friendship and mutual assistance. Wherefore do we ordain this day the high priesthood of the Jews, that thou beest called my friend, and have sent thee a present, a purple robe and golden crown. Desire now that thou art honored by us, that in a manner respect us also. Now it says here, when Jonathan had received this letter, he put on the pathetical robe at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, 4 years after the death of his brother Judas. At that time, no high priest had been made. So now they're saying what the contradiction here is, there were 7 years that there was no high priest. But what Josephus is saying is, at the time the Alchemist was high priest, Judah Maccabees as well was high priest for 3 years, and Alchemist was priest, and then he subtracted that 3 years from Alchemist and Jonathan was priest for that time for 4 years. So what he's saying, there was no priest for 7 years in Israel. That can't be the case, because why? When they rededicated the temple, the Day of Atonement every year. So you needed a high priest to make those atonements for those sins. So Alchemists held the high priesthood, Judas Maccabees held the high priesthood, and Jonathan, what we're going to read about in the Maccabees in a second, he was ordained the high priesthood. So now let's go to chapter 12, verse 43, so we can clear up this contradiction, because they said there's a contradiction, like I said, in Josephus, but this is what Josephus is saying, and there is no contradiction. This is what was going on. So it's book of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 12, and I'm going to start at number 413. But now, as the high priest, Alchemist was revolving to pull down the sanctuary which had been there in old time and had been built by the holy prophets He was smitten suddenly by God and fell down. This stroke made him fall down speechless upon the ground, and undergoing torment for many days, he had died. And when he had been high priest for 4 years. So now jump down to 434 of the same book. It says, and when his character was so excellent while he was alive, he left behind him a glorious reputation and memorial by gaining freedom for his nation and delivering them from slavery under the Macedonians. And when he had died, retained the high priesthood 3 years. He died. So now this was, speaking of Judas Maccabees, retaining the high priest. So this was the 7 years in which Josephus is talking about. There was no high priest. And when he's saying that, there was no real high priest, because Alchemist was not supposed to be the high priest. He reigned for what was it, for 4 years as high priest, and then after he died, Judas Maccabees became the high priest. So that was the 7 years that Josephus is saying that there was no high priest. But that couldn't be the case, because why? You needed a high priest to make the sacrifices for atonement. So what it's saying is there was no high priest that was elected the correct way to be the high priest. Because why? Alchemist, what, usurped he went to the Greeks to become high priest, and Judas Maccabees was elected high priest because of his valiant acts. So going back into the book, and then we're going to go into the Maccabees. After Alchemist's death, Bacchides departed from Judea, taking only the special force with him which he brought with him, apparently relying on the garrisons he had left in the various cities. He may also have thought that the situation would quiet down with the death of Alchemist, who had been a cause of friction between the Nationalist Party and the Hellenizers. For 2 years, there was peace in the country. We just read that in the Maccabees. The Greek garrison prevented Jonathan and his troops from entering Jerusalem, thereby carrying out the wishes of the most important among the Hellenizers, who was apprehensive about the Jerusalem or the Hasmoneans. In the meantime, Jonathan gathered the national forces which had scattered after Judas' death, and once again began to harass the Hellenizers wherever he could. All the while, the Hellenizers sent deputations to Demetrius and Caddis to complain about Jonathan's hounding of the Greek king's loyal subjects, and to propose that the suppression of the rebels in order not to give Jonathan time to position further. Now, while he was not yet too strong, there was a time to swoop down on him in a surprise attack and put an end to the nationalist movement and to the revolt. These words found a receptive ear in Bacchides, and in 158 BCE, Judea taking the Hasmoneans and their families by surprise. The Hellenizers and the allies of the Syrians gave assurances for their part to capture Jonathan and turn him over to Bacchides. But word of this pledge reached Jonathan and his brother Simon, and they fled into the desert, first killing 50 of the Hellenizers who had been parties to the promise. Now, we just read that in Maccabees chapter 9. Jonathan built a fortress in the desert in the oasis called Beth Basai. And the book of Josephus called it Beth Algia. Bacchides laid siege to the place, and by putting down Simon in charge, Jonathan quietly slipped out of the basin with a small detachment of troops and struck at the small Arab tribe which had aided Bacchides. Then he passed through the towns and villages of Judea, enlisting new troops. In force, Jonathan returned to attack Bacchides, who was still besieging Simon. Bacchides' troops turned around to repel the attackers, whereupon Simon and his men emerged from the fortress and fell upon the Syrians from the rear. The two brothers did not score a decisive victory, but by now Bacchides had lost all enthusiasm for this war on behalf of the Hellenizers. It was clear that these allies of his monarch had no roots in this nation, and that most of the people supported the Hasmoneans. By disparaging the nationalist party, the Hellenizers were endangering the position of the Syrian army in Judea. Angry at having been misled, Bacchides ordered a number of the Hellenizers killed. Again, we just read that in the first Maccabees 9. Members of the Hellenizers killed. When Jonathan learned of this, he dispatched a peace offer to Bacchides, who was agreeable. They exchanged prisoners and promises not to continue fighting one another. Garrisons in the fortress he had built, and taking hostages from among the leaders of the nationalist party and imprisoning them and the Acra. He returned home. Jonathan did not go to Jerusalem. He had given his word that he would not fight the Syrians in Jerusalem, and the Acra in particular was protected by a Syrian garrison. He went out to Michmas to the north, 2 hours distance, a 2-hour distance to Jerusalem. For 5 years, 158 to 153 BCE, the country again knew peace. The Hellenizers and the aristocracy ruled in Jerusalem. With the aid of the foreign garrison, outwardly Jonathan submitted to the Syrian king, but secretly he continued to enlist fighting men from among loyal Jews. And as soon as he felt himself sufficiently strong to judge the people, and he destroyed the ungodly out of Israel. He restored to such measures for the Hellenizers were opposed both to freedom of religion and to the liberation of the nation. Their goal went counter to the spirit of the people, nor were they aware of the times in which they lived. They did not realize how shaky Syria's political position was, nor how easily the situation might be exploited to free Judea from the foreign yoke. The Hasmonean party was full aware of these possibilities, and that realization won them the hearts of the masses, a fact none knew better than Jonathan, son of Mattathias. Thus it came about that during these 5 years of tranquility, the Hellenizers grew progressively weaker, while the nationalist religious party steadily gained ground. Reputed opposition party, the Hasmoneans now became the ruling popular party. And after Judas Maccabees, no one contributed more to this transformation than Jonathan. So as we see here, excuse me, just more water real quick. As we see here, Jonathan became the ruling party of Israel at this time. He became the governor, and later on we're going to read he's going to be the governor and high priest. So this is the beginning of the rule of the Hasmoneans. And as we continue the lesson, I'm going to continue to read. I'm going to read up to Maccabees chapter 13, first Maccabees chapter 13. We're going to understand what Jonathan did to build Israel to a sovereign state to rule on their own. And from there, we're going to read about a little bit about Simon Maccabees as they were both killed, Judas Maccabees and later Simon Maccabees. But out of Simon Maccabees, he had a son called John Hyrcanus. And John Hyrcanus was the one that actually went about the other nations to the religion of the Jews. And from there, John Hyrcanus had 2 sons, and one was married to a woman named Salome, and we're going to touch more on that in the next video. And from their rulership, from John Hyrcanus, Archipolis, and Jonius Alexander, is where we came into the Pharisees came into power, and we're going to read that in the next video. So we're going to touch more on Jonathan and his brother Simon, and how from their leadership came the independent state of Israel before the New Testament Roman occupation. First Maccabees chapter 10. In the 160th year, Alexander, the son of Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, went up and took Ptolemais for the people and have received him, by means whereof he reigned there. So let's see who Alexander was in the who's who in the Bible. Alexander Balus. Alexander Balus Epiphanes, king of the Seleucid Empire. Alexander Balus, a claimant to the Seleucid throne, Ptolemais, and gained control of the country by 150 BC. The high priest Jonathan, who had supported him, was made ethnarch, which is a governor of Jerusalem. In 145 BCE, Alexander was in turn defeated by another claimant, Demetrius II, with the help of Ptolemy VI of Egypt, whose daughter Cleopatra was married to Alexander, where he was killed by a tribal sheik. Let's go into Maccabees chapter 10, 3 of Alexander and how Jonathan became the high priest of Israel. Chapter 10. In the 160th year, Alexander, the son of Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, Ptolemy, for the people had received him, and by means whereof he reigned there. Now when King Demetrius heard thereof, he gathered together an exceeding great host him to fight. Moreover, Demetrius sent letters to Jonathan with loving words, as so he magnified himself. For said he, let us take peace with thee before he join with Alexander against us, else he will remember all the evils that we have done against him and against his brethren and his people. Now remember each other. It says, wherefore he gave him authority to gather together in hosts and to provide weapons that he might aid him in battle. He commanded also that the hostages that were in the tower should be delivered him. Then came Jonathan to Jerusalem and read the letters in the audience of all the people, and of them, and them that were in the tower, who were sore afraid, when they had heard that the king had given him authority to gather together in hosts. Whereupon they of the tower delivered their hostages unto Jonathan, and he delivered them unto their parents. This done, Jonathan settled himself in Jerusalem, began to build and repair the city. And he commanded the workmen to build the walls and the Mount Sion round about, the square stones for fortification. And they did so. Then the strangers which was in the fortresses, which Maccabees had built, fled away, and so much as every man left his place. Only at Bethshura, certain of these that have forsaken the law and the commandments remain still, place of refuge. Now when King Alexander had heard what promises Demetrius had sent unto Jonathan, when also it was told of him the battles and nobles acts which he and his brethren had done, endured, he said, shall we find such another man? Now therefore we will make him our friend and confederate. A letter and sent it unto him according to these words, saying to his brother Jonathan, send him greetings, we have heard of thee, and thou art a man of great power, and meet to our friend. Today we ordain thee to be the high priest of thy nation, and to be called the king's friend. And wherefore he sent him a purple robe and a crown of gold, and required thee to take our part with us. So in the 7th month, year at the tabernacle, what have we done that Alexander had prevented us in making eminent words of encouragement and promises and gifts, that I may have their aid? He sent unto them, therefore, King Demetrius, unto the people of the Jews, sendeth greetings. Wherefore you have kept covenants with us, our friendship is glad. Continue ye still to be faithful unto us, and we will recompense you for the things you have done in our behalf, any enmities, and will give you rewards. When now will I do free you? I also release all the Jews from tributaries and from customs of salt and from crown taxes, appertaineth unto me to receive for the third part of the seed and half the fruit of the trees. I release it so that they of the 3 governments which are added unto thee out of the country of Samaria and Galilee, and from this day forth forevermore. Let Jerusalem also be holy and free, both from tenth and tribute. And as for the tower which is at Jerusalem, I yield up my authority over it and give it to the high priest, that he may set it as much as he'll choose to keep it. I freely set at liberty every one of the Jews that were carried captives out of the land of Judea and to any part of my kingdom. Well, that my officers remit the tributes even of their cattle. Furthermore, will I do unto all the feasts, moons, and solemn days, and the 3 days before the feast, and 3 days after the feast, shall be all days of immunity and freedom for all the Jews in my realm. I have authority to meddle with them, nor to molest any of them any matter. There that be enrolled among the king's forces about 30,000 men of the Jews, whom it shall pay be given, also belonging to the king's forces. And of them shall be placed in the king's stronghold, of whom also shall enter the kingdom. And that their overseers and governors be of themselves, and that they shall live after their own laws, have commanded in the land of Judea. And concerning the three governments there from the country of Samaria, let them be joined with Judea, that they may be reckoned to be one on another. They are the authority than the high priest. As for Ptolemy pertaining thereto, I give it as a free gift to the sanctuary at Jerusalem, expenses of the sanctuary. Moreover, I give every 1,000 shekels of silver out of the king's accounts from the places of appertaining, and all over the overplus which the officers paid for time. And from henceforth shall be given toward the works of the temple. And besides this, the 5,000 shekels of silver, which they took from the uses of the temple out of the accounts year by year, even those things will be released, because they obtain to the priests that minister. And whosoever they that be that flee into the temple at Jerusalem, or be within the liberties thereof, be indebted unto the king for any other matter, let him be at liberty in thy realm. And for the building also and repairing of the works of the sanctuary, expenses shall be given to the king's accounts of the walls of Jerusalem, and for the fortifying thereof round about, expenses shall be given out of all the king's accounts. Building for the walls in Judea. Now when Jonathan and the people heard these words, they gave no credit to them, nor received them, because they remembered the great evil that he had done in Israel, and he had afflicted them their very sore. So he sent a appeasing letter saying when they say something is too good to be true, it probably is. So what he learned that Alexander besought Jonathan, made him high priest, and gave them gifts and promised them friendship and an army. So what happened? King Demetrius heard about it. He turned around and tried to do the same thing, but when it said in the Maccabees, he thought highly of himself. So he wrote something that was even that the Jews are like, nah, we're not falling for that because it's too good to be true. He's saying he's going to set them free. He's going to pay the temple. He's going to help rebuild the city. He's going to give the priests. He's going to give them 15,000 shekels every year. Jonathan, when they read this, was like, nah. So, and then the people heard these words, nor as they remember he had done in Israel, for he afflicted them very sore. But with Alexander, they were well pleased, because he was the first that entrusted of true peace with them always. So Alexander of Antiochus Epiphanes, we're going to get into that in a second. He didn't come with deceitful words. He didn't come trying to deceive them. He actually came with true peace, and he made himself confederate with them, and they to him. So they joined forces and became one army. So I'm going to read out of the book again. 153 BCE, the Syrian throne was occupied by a succession of kings for a day of the Seleucid dynasty. Achieved power by revolt and murder. This situation was obviously to the advantage of the Hasmoneans, whose political fortunes rose steadily, and to the complete national liberation of Judea, which was achieved over a period of slightly less than 10 years, 153 to 141 BCE. Now, this is what we just read about in 1 Maccabees 10, the beginning of the chapter. In 153 BCE, the Syrian throne was claimed by a youth of lowly origin, Alexander Ballas, who gave himself out as a son of Antiochus, or Antiochus, if you want to get politically correct, the fourth, Epiphanes. He was supported in his claim by Attalus II, king of Pergam, as well as Ptolemy VI of Egypt, and Arathales VI, king of Cappadocia. The pretender, well, it calls him the pretender because at this time, they knew not the legitimate son of Antiochus Epiphanes, but he came claiming the throne because he said that he was a son, but they knew that he wasn't. So what was going on? They wanted him to be in power because they didn't like King Demetrius. So they wanted him to be king instead of Demetrius II. The pretender went to Rome with the subject of persuading the Senate to recognize him as Antiochus' son and a legitimate monarch of Syria. As a way of adding to the confusion in Syria, in line with the principle of divide and rule, the Senate acknowledged Balas' royal origin, although everyone knew the truth. So everybody knew that he was Antiochus Epiphanes' son, but they wanted what? They wanted Demetrius out the way. Sorry, I said Demetrius II earlier. This is actually still Demetrius I. This is his father. Recognized by Rome as king, Alexander Balas arrived in Syria, ready to do battle with Demetrius Soter. The latter's unpopularity with the Syrian people improved the pretender's prospects of winning the throne, and indeed Demetrius soon found himself in difficulties. He appealed to Jonathan for help in his war against Balas, even allowing him to mobilize troops in Judea for the purpose. In return for Jonathan's military assistance, Demetrius promised to release the leaders of the nationalist religion party still held hostages in Acre. Happy at the turn of affairs, Jonathan hurried to Jerusalem. Demetrius kept his word and freed the hostages, whereupon Jonathan conquered the city except for the Acre and strengthened the Temple Mount. Most of the garrisons which Bacchides had posted in the fortress returned to Syria, leaving only those in Bethzur and Acre. Jonathan was quick to change the municipal leadership of Jerusalem, repair the walls of the city, and generally took measures which, according to the wishes of the religious nationalist party. Learning of the inducements and Demetrius was offering Jonathan, Alexander was not slow to make his own bid for Jonathan's support by offering him the highest possible privilege in Judea. He appointed Jonathan the high priesthood. As high priest, Jonathan was also ethnarch, which means governor. To indicate Jonathan's high rank, Balas sent him a robe of purple and a wreath of gold. In the year 153 BCE, a priest of the Hasmonean, the high and
breaking up, right?
The whole thing, or the last part of it?
Yeah, just that last part. I mean, I couldn't
start over from the beginning of the paragraph or the middle of the paragraph.
Yeah, just the beginning of the paragraph.
The beginning of the paragraph.
Yeah.
Learning of the inducements Demetrius was offering Jonathan, Alexander was not slow to make his own bid for Jonathan's support by offering him the highest possible privilege in Judea, Jonathan to the high priesthood. Jonathan was also ethnarch, meaning governor. To indicate Jonathan's high rank, Balas sent him a robe of purple and a wreath of gold. The Feast of Tabernacles in the year 153 BCE, a priest of the Hasmonean line officiated as priesthood in the temple for the first time. With this, the high priesthood passed from the descendants of Zadok 800 years. At the same time, the Hellenizers ceased to exist as a party. So now the Hasmoneans had complete rule over Judea at the time. The Hellenizers, who were Greek sympathizers, ceased to exist as a party. So the leading in Israel at this time was Jonathan and his brother Simeon, which was the Hasmoneans. So this is the rise of the Hasmonean dynasty, replaced by the Sadducees, while the Hasidim were supplemented by the Pharisees and Essenes. Jonathan, the representative of the religious nationalist party, became the religious and political head of the nation. Of the state, the high priesthood passed to the Hasmoneans. So with that, we have to understand, remember that Jonathan and them, they actually can be high priests because they are of the sons of Aaron as well. Their father Mattathias was a direct descendant of Phineas, who was the third high priest of Israel. It was Aaron, and then his son Eleazar, and then who had Phineas, who was high priest. So Mattathias and them, they came from Phineas, so they had a right to be high priest. And as we get into the next part of the lesson, and for part 2, we're going to see later on down the line how the high priesthood was also corrupted, and Rome got into the mix, and they started setting up who they wanted as high priests, puppets, as you will. The fact that neither Demetrius nor Alexander Ballas made any overtures to the Hellenizers, then the actual government party made all their offers to the religious national party, which was fighting foreign rule. Religion and culture is eloquent testimony to the deep roots of the religious national parties among the people. On the other hand, the wealthy Hellenizing faction attracted by Greek culture had little in common with the masses. So that's why you get, when you read into the New Testament, there is no difference between Jew and Greek. And speaking of these descendants, these people who still follow Greek culture, a lot of our Israelites were accepted Greek culture either by force or by will. And when you get into the New Testament, a lot of our Israelite brothers and sisters were still practicing those Greek customs. That's why Paul went to Ephesus, Corinth, Macedonia, Cappadocia, all those other places, Turkey, Greek. Some of those were Turkey countries. Some of those were Turkish cities. Some of those were Greek cities. Those were people that were still following pagan and Greek customs. And when you read in Acts, he disputed with them, some of the people there that were in Turkey, and they were worshiping Diana, which was a Greek god. And those people were Israelites that were following Greek customs. So that's the difference. Even with that, that's a lesson for another day. So going back to the topic, these Greeks, Jews, they had children, and of course their children passed on Greek customs, and that's why you get in the New Testament, you got Hellenized Jews in the New Testament. Moreover, the religious nationalist party possessed a popular leader, the scion of simple priestly family, beloved by the majority of the nation as a liberator from a foreign faith and foreign political oppression. Concessions granted by Jonathan by Alex Ballas, and Jonathan backed by abundance of indictments of his own. We just read that the letter that he sent. He promised to exempt the Jews from all the poll tax, salt tax, crown tax, 1/3 of the grain tax, and half of the fruit tax, to turn the acre over to Jonathan, and to free without ransom all Jews captured by the Syrians during the war, who are now scattered throughout the Syrian territories. He was prepared to concede that payments of taxes and other debts falling due on a Sabbath and other Jew feast days, and even on the new moon, which is in the time of the temple, was a half holy day, be deferred to the following weekday. To cede 3 districts in Syria to Judea, and exempt them from the payment of taxes, to sum of money from his treasury from the needs of the people, and to appropriate the income from the port of Acco for the same purpose. Demetrius also offered to cover the expenses of constructing the wall of Jerusalem from the royal treasury, and to admit into the king's army 30,000 Jewish soldiers with Jewish commanding officers, chosen from among the troops, who would be granted the right to observe the Sabbath and other Jewish feast days, as well as the dietary precepts of the Jews' religion. They were also promised other privileges. Such extravagant promises, both in nature and quality, led to conclude that Demetrius' letter is either at very best exceedingly free, rendering from the author of First Maccabees, or it is nevertheless quite possible that that Jonathan perceived his treachery and did not take up his offer. A discerning statesman, he was certain that Demetrius had no hope of success in his war against Ballas, for he was both hated by his own people and the countries adjoining to the kingdom of Syria. Accordingly, Jonathan chose to cast his lot with Alexander, and he chose not to, and he had no cause to regret his decision. In 150 BCE, Demetrius was defeated by a coalition of monarchs, and Alexander became king of Syria. To make his throne more secure once he was king, Alexander turned to Ptolemy Philometor, king of Egypt, and asked for the hand of his daughter Cleopatra in marriage. Philometor agreed, and the royal wedding took place at Acco in great splendor. King Alexander invited Jonathan to the festivities and received him with great honor. To the displeasure of the Hellenizers, the faction was still in cosens to the Acria and most probably retained representatives in many centers in Judea. Although Jonathan had driven them out of most towns, the Hellenizers sent emissaries to Alexander at Acco to complain about Jonathan, denouncing him as the enemy of the Syrians and their allies. But Alexander paid no attention to them and conferred even greater honors on Jonathan. He seated him on his right hand and made him dressed in purple robes and appointed him strategos, which is the commander of the army, and Meridachis, which is the civil governor of Judea, and perhaps all of Palestine, as a Syrian vessel. Thus Jonathan became tantamount to a Ottomania's ruler in Judea. Only the Syrian garrison and Acra remained, to indicate that supreme power still lay in the hands of the Syrian. Jonathan did not ask Alexander to remove the garrison for fear the Syrian king would suspect him of wishing to free himself completely of the Syrian rule. So what happened here was what? He cast his lots with Alexander. He played the part, and Alexander made him his right-hand man. Same thing that Nebuchadnezzar did with Daniel, the same thing that Pharaoh did with Joseph. So using wisdom and discernment, Jonathan played the part to what? Help liberate his people. So when we have Israelites today saying death to the white man is the devil, and not getting in important roles to help us as a nation of people, they don't understand the scriptures. Because why? Calling somebody a coon because they have high government or official titles, they working for the white man, they a traitor to the people. No, they played it smart. Why? Joseph became the right hand. He became the right hand of Pharaoh's man. He did what? He helped the Israelites. He helped the Egyptians during the 7-year famine. In return, he was granted pretty much rulership with only answering second to Pharaoh. With Daniel, he interpreted the dreams. He kept the laws of the Most High, but was still subject under Nebuchadnezzar. He became what? Him and Abednego, Meshach, and Azariah and them, they became what? They became governors of the provinces that he set them up. So they used wisdom. Nehemiah, he was the Persian king. I think it was Artaxerxes. He was his cupbearer. He played his part. He was set up as governor, tetrarch. So the brothers that was in the captivity, they did what? They didn't say, oh, death to the white man, blah, blah, this and that. No. They understood what was going on. They was being punished by the Most High, played their parts, and rose up to power to help free Israel from the occupations and the captivities that we were in. So now where was I at for this one? So going back to 1 Maccabees 10. You had something to say? Did I say something? Oh, going back to 1 Maccabees 10. So now I was at verse 47. But with Alexander they were well pleased, because he was the first that entreated of true peace with them, and they were confederate with him always. So this is 1 Maccabees 10 and 47. Verse 48. Then gathered King Alexander great forces and encamped over against Demetrius. And after the two kings had joined battle, Demetrius' host fled, but Alexander followed him and prevailed against him. And he continued the battle very sore until the sun set down. And that day was Demetrius slain. Afterward, Alexander sent ambassadors to Ptolemy, a message to this effect: for as much as I am come again to my realm, and am set in the throne of my progenitors, and have gotten the dominion and overthrown Demetrius and recovered our country, for after I had joined battle with him, both he and his host were discomfited by us, so we sat on the throne of his kingdom. Now therefore let us make a league of amity together, and give me now thy daughter to wife, and I will be thy son-in-law, and will give both thee and her gifts according to thy dignity. Then Ptolemy the king gave answer, saying, happy be the day wherein thou didst return into the land of thy fathers, and sattest in the throne of their kingdom. And now will I do to thee as thou hast written. Meet me therefore at Ptolemy, that we may see one another, for I will marry my daughter to thee according to thy desire. So Ptolemy went out of Egypt with his daughter Cleopatra. And when they came unto Ptolemy in 162nd year, where King Alexander meeting him, gave unto him his daughter Cleopatra, and celebrated her marriage at Ptolemy with great glory, as a manner of king is. Now King Alexander had written unto Jonathan, whose thereupon went honorably to Ptolemy, where he had met the two kings, and gave them and their friends silver and gold, and many presents, and found favor in their sight. Certain pestilent fellows of Israel, men of a wicked life, so these were the Hellenistic Jews, assembled themselves against them to accuse him, but the king would not hear them. We just read that in the book as well. Yea, more than that, the king commanded to take off his garments and clothe him in purple, and they did so. Also he made him sit by himself, and said unto his princes, go with him into the midst of the city, and make proclamation that no man complain against him in any matter, and that no man trouble him cause. So that goes into the scripture that says what? When a man's ways please the Lord, he shall make even his enemies be at peace with him. So the Maccabees from the tribe of Levi, they were Levites. They were what? To the law. So they were what? They were the Torah. So they were doing what? Doing what the law of Moses. From that, they gained wisdom and discernment how to dwell with their enemies, and which in turn granted Jonathan and him, and in turn Judea becoming an independent state, only controlled by Syria. But we're going to read how much more Jonathan put in work to completely free Judea, and that's going to pass. Unfortunately, Jonathan didn't get to see it through, because eventually he was killed. Read in I believe it's chapter 12 when he was killed. Let me see for a second. It was a chapter 12. Yeah, so we're going to read, when we read in chapter 12, eventually Jonathan was killed in battle, and from there Simon took over, and from Simon he actually finished up what his brothers and father and his brothers and father started, and actually made Judea a completely free country of all nations. And Judea at that time will be ruling for a while as a free country, but we're going to get into that. So it says, so he made him, so when his, jump down to verse 64. And when his accusers saw that he was honored according to the proclamation and clothed in purple, they fled all away. So the king honored him and wrote him among his chief friends, and made him a duke and partaker of his dominion. Afterward, Jonathan returned to Jerusalem with peace and gladness. Furthermore, in the 103 score and fifth year came Demetrius, son of Demetrius. So this is Demetrius II. And so out of Crete into the land of his fathers, whereof when King Alexander heard tell, he was right sorry, and returned unto Antioch. Then Demetrius made Apollonius the governor of Seleucia, his general, who gathered together a great host, and camped in Gemnia, and sent unto Jonathan the high priest, saying, thou alone liftest up thyself against us, and I was laughed to scorn for thy sake, and reproach, and why dost thou vent thy power against us in the mountains? So before we get into that, let's read about Demetrius II and his general real quick. Since I'm on the A's already, I'll go to Apollonius. Apollonius, the son of Genius, he was a governor of a Jewish province in the time of Judas Maccabees. And it says what? He a Seleucid general with the military governor in Samaria at the time of the Maccabean revolt. He led a force to crush the insurgents. It was ambushed and routed by Judas Maccabees in a steep incline to Labona along the main road through the hills of Samaria to Jerusalem. Apollonius was killed in this engagement. Oh, so this is that's the other Apollonius. Sorry, this is the one that I want. Sorry about that. He was the general of the Seleucid ruler Demetrius II. He went out with a strong army against Judea. Then under the leadership of Jonathan, brother of Judas Maccabees, Apollonius camped at Gemnia on the coast plain and challenged Jonathan to meet him in battle on open ground where there was no stone or pebble or place to flee. That is, where the Jews could not fight as guerrillas in the familiar hill terrain. Jonathan felt strong enough to accept this challenge, and he led a force of 10,000 men into the coastal plain with his brother Simon, bringing up reinforcements. The wily Apollonists feigned a retreat and drew the Israelites into a trap. They were attacked from rear by cavalry units that had been concealed about, but stood the ground all day until Simon was able to counterattack and rout the cavalry. Apollonius and his troops were pursued into Zostis, which is modern-day Ashdod, and the outlying defenses in which were captured and burned. After this victory, the Maccabean army was regarded as the strongest military force in that area. So that was Apollonius. He was the general under Demetrius II. So now let's look up Demetrius II before we get back into the scriptures of the Maccabees. Demetrius II, Nicator, ruler of the Seleucid kingdom, 145 to 138 BCE, and again 129 to 5 BCE. Demetrius II, son of Demetrius I, wrested the Seleucid throne from his cousin Alexander Balus with the help of the Egyptian army leader led by Ptolemy VI. Demetrius marched into Ptolemais and summoned Jonathan, the high priest, who was besieging the Seleucid garrison in Jerusalem. Arriving with lavish gifts, Jonathan made a good impression on the king and was confirmed in his office, as well as being granted tax exemptions. Jonathan later came to the military aid of Demetrius when the king was in trouble due to revolt in his army. The disaffection was led by ambitious general Typho, who subsequently succeeded in overthrowing Demetrius and installing in his stead Antiochus VI, the young son of Antiochus Balus, and that's who unfortunately got the upper hand on Jonathan and eventually had him killed, which was Typho. We're going to read about that in a little bit. Demetrius continued his struggle to regain the throne and succeeded in doing so in 129 BC after 10 years in captivity in Media. This time he reigned for 4 years during the period that John Hyrcanus, the son of Simon, was high priest in Jerusalem. So that's the history on Demetrius II and his general Apollonius. Then Demetrius made Apollonius the governor of Celesyria, his general, who gathered together a great host and camped in Jamia and sent unto Jonathan the high priest, saying, Thou alone lifted up thyself against us, scorn for thy sake and reproach. And why dost thou vamp thy power against us in the mountains? Now therefore, if thou trustest in thy own strength, come down to us in the plain field, and let us try the matter together. For with me is the power of the cities. Ask and learn who I am. So the heathens always had some cockiness and pride about them about going to battle against the Jews, not knowing, I guess they didn't read Judas 5, where it said that when we keep in God's laws, the Most High is going to fight for us. I guess nobody told him that, and he found out the hard way. So, and learn who I am, and the rest that take our part. And they shall tell thee that thy foot is not able to stand before our face, for thy fathers have been twice put to flight in their own land. Wherefore now thou shalt not be able to abide the horsemen and so great a power in the plain, where was neither stone nor flint nor place to flee into. So when Jonathan heard these words of Apollonius, he was moved in his mind, and choosing 10,000 men, he went out of Jerusalem, where Simon his brother met him for to help him. And he pitched his tents against Joppa, but they of Joppa shut him out of the city because Apollonius had a garrison there. Then Jonathan had laid siege into it, whereupon they of the city let him in for fear, and so Jonathan won Joppa. Wherefore, and Joppa is also, when you read in the New Testament, what is Joppa, where the sect of Cornelius men came down, which is a sect in one of the cities of the northern tribes of Israel. Wherefore, when Apollonius heard, he took up 3,000 horsemen with a great host of footmen, and went to Azotus as one that journeyed, and there withdrew him forth in the plain, because he had a great number of horsemen, and whom he put in his trust. Then Jonathan followed after him to Azotus, where the armies joined battle. Now Apollonius had left 1,000 horsemen in ambush, and Jonathan knew that there was an ambushment behind him, for they had compassed in his host and cast darts at the people from morning till evening. But the people stood still as Jonathan had commanded them, and so the enemy's horses were tired. Then brought Simon forth his host and set them against the footmen, for the horsemen were spent, who were discomforted by him, and fled. The horsemen also, being scattered into the field, fled to Astos. So what happened was, intended to trap Jonathan and Simon. Are you about to get something? Oh, so when they what happened was Apollonius trapped Jonathan and his brother Simon by sneaking up behind them, but being the political and military leader, he knew about warfare. He knew that they were behind him, because when they was tracking him, he was in turn tracking them. So they thought that the Maccabeans were walking into an ambush, but they themselves. But that's why you can. I don't know why this is not taught in history schools or in schools. The Maccabeans, along with Hannibal, who was another tribe of Naphtali, was one of the greatest military minds in the world. Was Hannibal, Judas Maccabees, Simon, and Jonathan. These men was one of the greatest military minds in the world at their time, and their tactics are still used in the army and the Marines till this day. They use Hannibal tactics. They use guerrilla warfare, which were used in Vietnam War. All these came from Israelite men. And it says what? Verse 84. But Jonathan set fire on Astos and the cities round about it, and took their spoils, and the temple of Dagon with them that were fled into it, he burned with fire. Thus there were burned and slain with the sword fell nigh 8,000 men. And from thence Jonathan removed his host and camped against Ascalon, where the men of the city came forth and met him with great pomp. After this returned Jonathan and his host into Jerusalem, having many spoils. Now when King Alexander heard these things, he honored Jonathan yet more, and sent him a buckle of gold, as the use is to be given to such as heir of the king's blood. And he gave him also Acharon, with the borders thereof in possession. So the more Jonathan defeated Alexander's enemies, the more he waxed great, and the greater and more powerful he became as a leader, the governor of Israel, and the high priest of Israel. Now, chapter 11. And the king of Egypt gathered together a great host and went to get Alexander's kingdom and join it to his own. Whereupon he took his journey into Syria in peaceable manner, as cities opened unto him, and met him. For King Alexander had commanded them so too, because he was his father-in-law. Now as Ptolemy entered into the cities, he set in every one of them a garrison of soldiers to keep it. To Asostis, they shewed him the temple of Dagon, and was burnt, and Asostis and the suburbs thereof were destroyed, and the bodies that were cast abroad, and them in the battle, for they had made heaps of them by the way which he should pass. And they told the king whatsoever Jonathan had done, to the intent that he might blame him. But the king held his peace. Then Jonathan met the king with great pomp at Joppi, wherein they saluted one another in lodge. Afterward, Jonathan, we had gone with the king to the river called Elothorius, returned again to Jerusalem. King Ptolemy, therefore, having gotten the dominion of the cities by the sea unto Seleucia, upon the sea coast, imagined wicked counsels against Alexander. Whereupon he sent ambassadors unto King Demetrius, saying, Come, let us make a liege betwixt us, and I will give thee my daughter whom Alexander hath, and thou shalt reign in thy father's kingdom. For I repent that I gave my daughter unto him, for he sought to slay me. Thus did he slander him, because he was desirous of his kingdom. Wherefore he took his daughter from him and gave her to Demetrius, and forsook Alexander, so that their hatred was openly known. Then Ptolemy entered into Antioch, where he set 2 crowns upon his head, the crown of Asia and of Egypt. So that's what they always have. That's why they can never settle things, because they always have a lust of power, even among themselves. These are from the descendants of Alexander and the ones that put on crowns upon their head. These are their descendants, and their lust for power is growing so much that they're turning on each other, because they want to dominion of the world. They're not satisfied with what they had under subjection already. They want to rule everything. So now they're portraying each other to have the ultimate power. And the mean season was King Alexander in Sicilia, because those that dwelt in those parts had revolted from him. But when Alexander heard of this, he came to war against him, whereupon King Ptolemy brought forth his host and met him with a mighty power and put him to flight. So Alexander fled into Arabia, there to be defended, but King Ptolemy was exalted. For Zabdullah of the Arabian took off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. King Ptolemy also died the 3rd day after, and they that were in the strongholds were slain one of another. Why? Because he was wounded. So he died of his wound. So he had Alexander killed first, but also in that same battle, in that same battle was Ptolemy wounded. So he died of his wound. Alexander was killed. He had his head cut off. And then Ptolemy died of his wound a few days later. By this means, Demetrius reigned in the 167th year. So now Demetrius II is king. At the same time, Jonathan gathered together men that were in Judea to take the tower that was in Jerusalem, and he made many engines of war against it. Then certain ungodly persons who hated their own people, you see how these people keep popping up, these Hellenized Jews, they love the other nations so much and be a legion in a pact with these other nations that they betray their own people just so they can not practice our religion and practice the religion of the Jews, which they thought was freedom at that time. Went into the king and told him that Jonathan besieged the tower. Wherefore, when he heard, he was angry, and immediately removing, he came unto Ptolemy and wrote unto Jonathan that he should not lay siege to the tower, but come to speak with him at Ptolemy in great haste. Nevertheless, Jonathan, when he heard this, commanded to besiege it still. So he said, man, I'm trying to free my people. I don't care what you're talking about. You didn't already had my friend Alexander put to death. I don't respect you as a king. I'm trying to free my people. And nevertheless, Jonathan, when he heard this, commanded to besiege it still. And he chose certain of the elders of Israel and the priests and put himself in peril, and took silver and gold and raiment and diverse presents besides, and went to Ptolemy and to the king, where he found favor in his sight. And though certain ungodly men of the people had made complaints against him, yet the king entreated him as his predecessors had done before, and prompted him in the sight of all his friends, and confirmed him in the high priesthood yet, and in all the honors that he had before, and gave him preeminence among his chief friends. Then Jonathan desired the king that he would make Judea free from tribute, as also the 3 governments which the country of Samaria, and he promised him 300 talents. So the king consented and wrote letters unto Jonathan of all these things after this manner. King Demetrius unto his brother Jonathan, and unto the nation of the Jews, sendeth greeting. We send you here a copy of this letter, which we did write unto our cousin Lasthenes concerning you, that ye might see it. King Demetrius unto his father Lasthenes, sending greeting. We are determined to do good to the people of the Jews, who are our friends, and keep covenants with us, because of their goodwill toward us. Wherefore we have ratified unto them the borders of Judea, with the 3 governments of Ephraim and Lydia and Ramathaim, that were added unto Judea from the country of Samaria. All things are pertaining to them, for all such as do sacrifice in Jerusalem, instead of the payments which the king received of them yearly aforetime out of the fruits of the earth and the tree. And as for other things that belong unto us, as the tithes and customs pertaining unto us, as also the salt pits and the crown taxes, which are due unto us, we just discharge them from all their relief. So what was going on? Jonathan, went to the king, and he discharged them from their debts. Now therefore, see that thou make a copy of these things, and let it be delivered unto Jonathan, and set upon the holy mount, conspicuous place. After this, when King Demetrius saw that the land was quiet before him, and then no resistance was made against them, he sent away all his forces, everyone to his own place, except certain band of strangers, whom he had gathered from the isles of the heathen. Wherefore all the forces of his fathers hated him. Moreover, there was one, Typhon, that had been of Alexander's part afore, who seeing all the host murmured against Demetrius, went to Simeon the Arabian, that brought up Antiochus, the young son of Alexander, and lay sore upon him to deliver him this young Antiochus, that he might reign in his father's stead. He told him therefore all that Demetrius had done, and how his men of war were at enmity with him, and there he remained a long season. In the meantime, Jonathan sent unto King Demetrius that he should cast those of the tower out of Jerusalem, and those also in the fortress, for they fought against Israel. So Demetrius sent unto Jonathan, saying, I will not only do this for thee and thy people, but I will greatly honor thee and thy nation, if opportunity serve. Now therefore thou shalt do well, if thou send me men to help me, for all my forces are gone up before me. Upon this, Jonathan sent him 3,000 strong men unto Antioch, and when they came to the king was very glad of their coming. Howbeit they that were of the city gathered themselves together into the midst of the city, to a number of 120,000 men, and would have slain the king. Therefore the king fled into the court, and they of the city kept the passages of the city, and began to fight. Then the king called the Jews for help, who came all unto him all at once, and dispersing themselves throughout the city, slew that day in the city a number of 100,000. Also they set fire to the city, and gat many spoils that day, and delivered the king. So when they of the city saw that the Jews had got the city as they would, their courage was abated. Wherefore they made supplication to the king, and cried, saying, Grant us peace, and let the Jews cease from assaulting us in the city. With that they cast away their weapons, and made peace, and the Jews were honored in the sight of the king, and in the sight of all that were in his realm. And they returned to Jerusalem. So King Demetrius sat on the throne of his kingdom before him. Nevertheless, he dissembled in all that ever spake, and estranged himself from Jonathan. Neither rewarded him he accordingly to the benefits which he had received of him, but troubled him very sore. After this returned Typhon, and with him the young child Antiochus, who reigned and was crowned. Then they were gathered to him all the men of war, who Demetrius had put away, and they fought against Demetrius, who turned his back and fled. And at that time, young Antiochus wrote unto Jonathan, saying, I conform thee in the high priesthood, and appoint thee ruler over the four governments, to be one of the king's friends. Upon this he sent his golden vessels to be served in, and gave him leave to drink in gold, and to be clothed in purple, and wear a golden buckle. Excuse me. His brother Simeon he also made captain from the place called the Ladder of Tyrus, upon the borders of Egypt. Then Jonathan went forth and passed through the cities beyond the water, and all the forces of Syria gathered themselves unto him to help him. And when he came to Ascalon, they of the city met him honorably, from whence he went to Gaza, but they of Gaza shut him out. Wherefore he laid siege into it, and burned the suburbs thereof with fire, and spoiled them. Afterwards, when they of Gaza made supplication unto Jonathan, he made peace with them, and took the sons of their chief men for hostages, and sent them to Jerusalem, and passed through the country into Damascus. Now when Jonathan heard that Demetrius' princes were come to Caddis, which is in Galilee, with a great power, proposing to remove him out of the country, he went out to meet them, and left Simon his brother in the country. Then Simon encamped against Bethshura, and fought against it of a long season, and shut it up. But they desired to have peace with him. which he granted them, and they put him out from thence. And then put him out from thence, and took the city and set a garrison in it. As for Jonathan and his host, they pitched in the water of Gazanir, from whence betimes in the morning they gat in the plain of Nasar. And behold, the host of the strangers met them in the plain, who, having laid men in ambush for him in the mountains, came themselves over against him. So when they that lay in ambush rose out of their places and joined battle, all that were of Jonathan's side fled, and so much as there were none of them left except Mattathias, the son of Absalom, and Judas, the son of Calphi, the captains of the host. Then Jonathan rent his clothes and cast earth upon his head and prayed. Afterwards, turning again into battle, he put them to flight so that they run away. Now when his own men that were fled saw this, they turned again unto him, and with him pursued them to Caddis, even unto their own tents, and they were encamped. So there were slain of the heathen that day about 3,000 men, but Jonathan returned to Jerusalem. So now I'm reading the book about what just happened in the book. What was I at? With Jonathan both military and civil ruler in Judea, Syrian suzerainty there became a practical nominal. The Hellenizers lost all influence, and internal affairs were entirely in the hands of the Hasmoneans. But a statesman like Jonathan could not content himself even with this. It was his ambition to sever Judah from Syria altogether, and to turn little Judea into a great Jewish state. For the first goal, the time was not yet ripe. Moreover, in those days of consent, upheaval in Syria, the Syrian yoke was hardly felt, and Judea's subjection became little more than formality. More important was the second aim, and here Jonathan was helped by the instability in Syria and the changes taking place in the Seleucid dynasty. Not that external events were the main cause that Hasmoneans simply knew how to make the most of them for the needs of their people. Rather, a new situation had been achieved by the people of Judea as a result of demographic, economic, and cultural developments which have been taking place since the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. Out of that new position, an inner driving force had emerged and had been strengthened, which had made it possible for every turn of external events to be exploited to meet internal national needs. However, this sequence of events in Syria in the days of the Hasmoneans would have yielded no more benefit to the Judean state than had the confusion which prevailed in Persia between the death of Cambyses and the secession of Darius I to the throne, or the quarrels between Diadochi and the Epigoni after the death of Alexander the Great. The events were not a fundamental cause, only an immediate one. Circumstances merely hastened developments which were bound to occur even without them. What the state of Judea and its people lacked most was an outlet to the Mediterranean. Up to the time of the Hasmoneans, the Jews who had advanced in agriculture and in civilization have remained landlocked in their small country. With no outlet to the sea, they could not export any of their produce by the way of the Mediterranean. All the ports of Palestine were controlled by foreigners, those in the south by the Greeks, and those in the north by Tyre and Sidon. A national need, both political and economic, to gain control of the coastal cities have been ripening over the years. Now political events help to satisfy it. The political changes took place in rapid succession. Alexander Balis' reign was without incident for only 3 years, 150 to 147 BCE. He was a weak and licentious ruler who failed to win the affection of the Syrian nation and its subject people, an omission which was exploited by Demetrius II, son of Demetrius I, who in 147 BCE laid claim to his father's throne. The governor of Seoli, Syria, Apollonius Tyos, transformed his allegiance to Demetrius. Jonathan remained loyal to Alexander, and as a result fought a battle against Apollonius, from which he emerged victorious. Then Jonathan stormed the coastal area, drove the Syrian garrison out of Jaffa, and defeated Apollonius' army near Ashdod, while Ascalon opened its gates to him without a fight. Victorious and laden with booty, Jonathan returned to Jerusalem, where, as a mark of gratitude for his military help, Alexander sent him a golden bracelet and also turned Ekron and the surrounding areas over to Judea. The Hasmonean conquest of the ancient Philistine cities along and near the coast had begun. Jonathan's loyalty to Alexander is convincing testimony that the success of the Hasmoneans stemmed not merely from the Syria or from Jonathan's diplomatic acumen, but from the internal strength of the Jewish people and the For this time, Jonathan was not acting as a far-sighted statesman in his loyalty to the bludgeoning Alexander. He stood alone. Ballas was deserted not only by Apollonius Theos, his military commander, but even his father-in-law Ptolemy Philometor, who, with the aim of uniting the crown of Egypt and Syria on his own head, gradually conquered most of the cities of Syria. He dared not seize all the Syrian states immediately for fear of Rome, which would not permit any Near Eastern potentate to grow too strong. With this in mind, Ptolemy took his daughter back from Alexander and gave her to Demetrius II, thereby making it appear that his conquests in Samaria were all for the sake of his son-in-law. Ptolemy was apparently looking forward to the day he would rid himself of Demetrius once and for all. Of course, Ptolemy became an enemy of Jonathan, who was allied with Alexander. Nevertheless, when Ptolemy passed through Ashdod and the Greeks, there complained to him that Jonathan had demolished their temple and destroyed their land, Ptolemy took no action. We just read about that in chapter 11. And by this time, it was seen Jonathan was a power to be reckoned with. Ptolemy marched with a large force against Alexander, Demetrius' rival, and both armies met in the valley of Antioch on the Eniaperis River. Just part of Alexander's party was involved in the struggle against Demetrius. Only those troops who Alexander had taken with him to put down a revolt in Sicilia. The rest of the army remained at Antioch, and along with the local population, defected to Demetrius II. It is thus hardly surprising that Demetrius was defeated. He then fled to Arabia, where he was murdered by Zabdiel, the commander of the local Arab soldiery, who sent his head to Ptolemy. Ptolemy undoubtedly planned to betray Demetrius, the man for whom he had ostensibly been fighting and whose, rightful inheritance he sought to restore. But before he can carry out his plans, he died of his wounds received in the battle in 145 BCE. Demetrius II, Nicanor, Nicator the Victorious, became king of Syria. In spite of Demetrius' victory, Jonathan still hoped to finish what his brother Judas Maccabees had begun and make Judea completely independent. To this end, he laid siege to the Acra, still held by the Greek garrison and by the Hellenized Jews. This aroused the wrath of Demetrius, who sent a stern demand to Jonathan to lift the siege and report to him immediately, and Acra to account for his insolence. Jonathan was undismayed. He did not lift the siege. Nevertheless, reluctant to become embroiled in an open war with the king of Syria, he reported to him and Acra together with a number of Judean dignitaries and priests, and brought to him gifts of gold, silver, expensive garments, and other costly articles. The Hellenizers presented themselves before Demetrius at the same time and repeated the complaints about Jonathan which they had made in the days of Alexander. But Demetrius knew Jonathan's great power because of the people's backing. Ignoring the protests of the Hellenizers, who he realized had no deep roots in the nation, Demetrius received Jonathan with great honor, confirmed him in the high priesthood, military command, and civil governor of Judea. In return for contribution of a lump sum of 300 talents of silver from Jonathan to the royal treasury, Demetrius annexed to Judea 3 districts of Samaria: Ephraim, Lod, and Ramathaim. The Acre of the siege of which had so angered the king was not mentioned at all on this occasion. Apparently, Jonathan did lift the siege, and a Syrian garrison remained there as a symbol of that country's suzerainty over all Judea. Jonathan lifted the siege even in someone's account. Sorry, skip that part. In someone's account, Jonathan lifted the siege even before going to Acco in the account of his compliance with the king's order. And it says, he commanded that the citadel should not continue to be besieged. This would explain why the matter of the Acra was not raised at all at Acco. However that may be, the Syrian king was satisfied with Jonathan's behavior, and for Judea, the acquisition of the 3 new districts was a matter of great importance, with Jonathan confirmed as effective ruler of the country under the formal suzerainty of Syria. The end of the road of Judea's independence was in sight. In Syria, revolts against the throne multiplied. Alexander's former commanding general, Deodatus Tryphon of Apamea, now appeared with Alexander's son, Antiochus VI, who had been brought up in the home of an Arab by the name of Malchus in the year 143 BCE. Diotius proclaimed him king in place of Demetrius II, hoping that once Demetrius was out of the way, he would get rid of the boy, whose father, after all, was an impostor. He would himself assume the throne, exactly the hope Lysias had cherished during the reign of Antiochus IV and Ptolemy Philometor at the time of Alexander. Tryphon based his hopes of disposing Demetrius II on the fact that he was hated not only by the people of Antioch for his cruelty and events that he never paid his own soldiers. They were bitter against Demetrius because after defeating Alexander with an army comprised of both Syrian conscripts and mercenaries, he failed to pay his soldiers and had discharged all Syrians from the army, preferring to rely on foreign troops. In the Syrian capital of Antioch, open rebellion flared up against Demetrius. This afforded Jonathan the opportunity of demanding the removal of the remaining troops, garrisons, the Acria and Hazor. Sorely pressed, Demetrius acquiesced, but on condition that Jonathan sent him a Jewish contingent to save him from the rebellion subjects in Antioch. Jonathan sent 3,000 soldiers who squashed the rebellion in short order. Thus, some 30 years after Antiochus Epiphanes had appeared at the gates of Jerusalem at the head of his army to crush the revolt of the Jews against the desecration of all they held sacred, the armies of the Jews' high priests arrived at the gates of Antioch to put down the rebellion of the Antiochians against the cruel king. Time and historical circumstances has surely changed. Jonathan's troops saved the throne of Demetrius Nicator, but Demetrius showed no gratitude to the Jews. As soon as he was freed from the rebels, he went back to his promise to remove the Syrian garrison from the Acra. In the meantime, however, many of Demetrius' troops, none of whom had been paid, deserted and went over to Typhon, who was acting as a regent for the young Antiochus. With their help, Typhon conquered Antioch. And Antioch's name, Typhon, immediately confirmed everything that Demetrius had promised Jonathan. Speaking of the young king, he appointed Jonathan's brother, Simeon, Strategos, military and civil governor of the area of the ladder of Tyre, Thus, Simon also became the acting ruler of parts of Palestine, laying aside the confines of Judea, even though formerly they remained under Syrian control. The Hasmoneans had taken another great steps of their goal of expanding the boundaries of Little Judea to those of the great land of Israel of the days of David and Solomon. To this end, Jonathan also tried to obtain from the Syrian king dominion not only over the 3 districts of Samaria, but also over the region of Philistia, containing the coastal cities of Judea and Samaria, of economic importance to the Jews as an outlet to the Mediterranean. Since Demetrius had failed to keep his word, Jonathan and Simon abandoned him and allied themselves with Typhon. Which resisted and had to be taken by
You froze?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, the thing froze. Back.
Okay.
We'll probably cut out, Eddie.
I stepped away. Maybe a minute.
That's fine. And it says, then Mattathias ben Absalom and Judah ben Caphli quickly recovered, counterattacked, and routed the Syrians, pursuing them as far as Caddis, Naphtali. Jonathan and his men then returned to Jerusalem with considerable booty, with the retreating foes had jettisoned in their flight. Around this time, Simeon forced the Syrian garrison at Hazor to surrender and abandon the fortress, and posted a Jewish garrison there. There may be a hint of this important event, and the Melgat says on the 17th day of Nisan became a holiday because of the seizure of the Tower of the Shore. To buttress his rule in Palestine and free it altogether from the Syrian yoke, Jonathan sent 2 ambassadors to Rome, Naomius, son of Antiochus, and Antipas, son of Jason, as in the days of Judah Maccabee. The nationalist religious party again sent emissaries with Greek names for the purpose of strengthening the alliance with his brother Judah made with Rome. Emissaries were also sent out to conclude treaties of friendship with Sparta and other countries. The Jewish ambassadors to Sparta, the former king of the city, undoubtedly Arius I, who reigned from 309 to 265 BC, had sent a message of friendship to Onias, the high priest. Now, as we get into that, this is going into Maccabees 12. We're almost done, y'all. So I know this is a long class, but it's almost done. We got chapter 12 and 13, and we'll be done. So we're on chapter 12 now. Now, First Maccabees chapter 12. Now, when Jonathan saw that the time served him, he chose certain men and sent them to Rome for to confirm and renew the friendship that they had with them. And he sent letters also to the Simedonians, to the Lacedaemonians, and to other places for the same purpose. For they went unto Rome and entered into the Senate and said, Jonathan the high priest and the people of the Jews sent us unto you, and the people who should renew the friendship which he had with them, and the league as in former time. Upon this the Romans gave them letters unto the governors of every place, that they should bring unto them the land of Judea peaceably. And this is the copy of the letters which Jonathan wrote to the Lacedaemonians, Jonathan the high priest, and the elders of the nation, and the priests and the other people of the Jews, unto the Lacedaemonians, their brothers, send greetings. There were letters sent in times past unto Onias the high priest from Darius, who reigned then among you, to signify that ye are brethren, as the copy here underwritten does specify, at which time Onias entreated the ambassador that was sent honorably, and received the letters wherein declaration was made of the liege and friendship. Therefore we go, albeit we need none of these things, for we have the holy books of Scripture in our hands to comfort us. Have nonetheless attempted to send unto you the renewing of the brotherhood and friendship, lest which should become strangers to you altogether. For there is a long time past since ye sent unto us. We therefore at all times without ceasing, both in our feasts and our convenient days, do remember you in the sacrifices which we offer, and our prayers, as reason as is, and as becometh us to think upon our brethren. And we are right glad of your honor, as ourselves we had great troubles and wars on every side, and for so much as the kings that are round about us, we would not be so friends. For we have had help from heaven that secureth us, as so we were delivered, our enemies are brought under our feet. For this cause we chose Nominius, the son of Antiochus, and Antipas, the son of Jason, and sent them unto the Romans to renew the amity that we had with them in the former league. Them also to go and to you, and to salute you, and to deliver you our letters concerning the renewing of our brotherhood. Wherefore now you should do well to give us another answer. And this is the copy of the letter which the Anarian sent. Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Ananias, the high priest, greeting. It is found in writing that the Lacedaemonians and the Jews are brethren, and that they are the stock of Abraham. Now, therefore, since it's come to our knowledge, ye shall do well to write unto us of your prosperity. We do write back to you again that your cattle and goods are ours, and ours are yours. We do command, therefore, our ambassadors to make report unto you on this wise. Now, when Jonathan heard that Demetrius' princes were come to fight against them with the great host than before, he removed from Jerusalem and met them in the land of Amathus, for he gave them no respite to enter his country. He sent spies also unto their tents, who came again and told him that they were appointed to come unto them in the night season. Wherefore, as soon as the sun was down, Jonathan commanded his men to watch and to be in arms, that all the night long they be ready to fight. As also he sent forth sentinels round about the host. But when the adversaries heard that Jonathan and his men were ready for battle, they feared and trembled in their hearts, and they kindled fires in their camps. Howbeit Jonathan and his company knew it not all till the morning, for they saw the lights burning. Then Jonathan pursued after them, but overtook them not, for they were gone over the river Eleazar. Wherefore Jonathan turned to the Arabians, who were called Zabadians, and smote them and took their spoils. And removing thence, he came to Damascus, so passed through all the country. Simon also went forth and passed through the country into Ascalon, and the whole there adjoining, whence he from whence he turned aside to Joppa and won it. For he had heard that they would deliver the hold unto them that took Demetrius' part. Wherefore he set a garrison there to keep it. After this came Jonathan home again, and calling the elders of the people together, he consulted with them about building in the strongholds in Judea, and making the walls of Jerusalem higher, and raising a great mound between the tower and the city, for to separate it from the city, so that it might be alone, that men might neither sell or buy in it. Behold, upon this they came together to build upon the city, as part of the wall toward the brook on the east side was fallen down, and they repaired that which was called Caphthenia. Simon also set up Adia and Sephila, and made it strong with gates and bars. Now Typhon was about to get the kingdom of Asia and kill Antiochus the king, that he might set the crown upon his own head. Howbeit, he was afraid that Jonathan would not suffer him, and that he would fight against him. Wherefore he sought a way to make Jonathan, that he might kill him. So he removed and came to Besan. Then Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 men chosen for the battle, and came to Besan. Now when Typhon saw that Jonathan came with so great of a force, he durst not stretch forth out his hand against him, but received him honorably, and commended him unto all his friends, and gave him gifts, and commanded his men of war to be obedient unto him as to himself. And unto Jonathan also he said, Why hast thou put all this people to be so great, seeing that there is no war betwixt us? Therefore send them now home again, and choose a few men to wait on thee, and come thou to me to Ptolemais, and I will give thee and the rest of the strongholds and forces, and all that have any charge. As for me, I will return to depart, for this is the cause of my coming. So Jonathan, believing him, did as he bade him, and sent his host away. And unfortunately, from this call, this was Jonathan's undoing. They caught him slipping, and this was his undoing. So Jonathan, believing him as he did as he bade him, sent away his host, he sent them into the land of Judea. And with himself he retained about 3,000 men, of whom he sent 2,000 into Galilee, and 1,000 went with him. Now as soon as Jonathan entered into Ptolemais, they of Ptolemais shut the gates and took him, and all that came with him they slew with the sword. Then sent Typhon and host of footmen and horsemen into Galilee. plan to destroy all Jonathan's company. Jonathan and they that were with him were taken and slain. They encouraged one another and went close together and prepared to fight. Now therefore there followed upon them, perceiving that they were ready to fight for their lives, turned back again. Whereupon they that all came into the land of Judea peaceably, and where they all bewailed Jonathan and them that were with him, and they were so afraid. Therefore all Israel made great lamentation. Then all the heathen that were round about them sought to destroy them, for said they have no captain, nor anyone to help them. Now therefore let us make war upon them, and take away their memorial from among men. So as we see here, unfortunately, this was the end of Jonathan. So now there is only one Maccabean or Hasmonean son left, which is Simon. And from there, Simon is going to take up arms, and he's going to finish what his brothers Judas and Jonathan and their father Mattathias did. And I'm going to read out of the book because there's some more important details in this book that I wanted to read. And then I'm going to go back into chapter 13. So this will be the last chapter. So we'll wrap it up at this, and then we'll continue part 2, Lord's will. I know you guys are like, "Ooh, thank goodness!" Yeah, I know this is a long class. We almost done. This is the last chapter. Chapter 13 is the last chapter. I know I see Gamma over there about to fall asleep. So I'm gonna read. We're almost done. So. I read that one already. Smarting under his defeat at Hazor, Demetrius mobilized a large army to take revenge on Jonathan, who marched out to meet him at Hasmoth, north of the mountains of Lebanon. Apparently, Jonathan's army was larger than that of Demetrius. At any rate, the Syrians lost heart and fled from their positions during the night. Jonathan then attacked and defeated the Arabic tribe of the Zabedians and the Lebanese mountains, who had evidently joined forces with the Syrians against Judea and made off with booty. According to Derenenburg, there was a hint of this event in the following ancient Barata. That month, Adar, the Gentiles had risen against the remnants of the scribes in the country of Caddis and Beth Zabadi, and there came salvation. But Secura doubts that this is the incident referred to. From there, Jonathan went on to Damascus, traversing the entire country. While Jonathan was engaged in conquering the land, Simon was busy making himself master of the maritime towns. He conquered Jaffa, Judea's natural port, and stationed a Jewish garrison there. Another garrison was stationed in the city of Hadid on the coastal plain west of the mountains of Judea, near Lod and Modin. Meanwhile, Jonathan returned to Jerusalem and summoned the elders of Judea and proposed the city wall which he had previously built be fortified, and that a high wall be erected between the city and the Acra to cut off the Syrian garrison and the Jewish Hellenizers from the Jerusalem markets, thus preventing them from stealing into the city to buy food, and consequently force them to surrender. So that what they did, they put the stuff up for strategic means, so they can vanquish their enemy and cause them to starve them out and flush them out. Clearly, Jonathan and Simon were preparing to proclaim their independence in Judea, and a large Jewish army strong enough to pit itself against the mercenaries of the kingdom of Syria. Torn asunder by the fighting between rival claimants, and the throne stood at their command. Tryphon may have been aware of all this. His plan was to take the crown for himself as soon as he could get rid of Antiochus, the son of Alexander, for whom he had ostensibly acting as regent. But fear of Jonathan inhibited Tryphon from carrying out his design. According to Gratz, Jonathan was loyal to the memory of Alexander and devoted champion of the rights of Antiochus. Tryphon may have feared that Jonathan would take advantage of his coup to throw off the Syrian yoke altogether. In either case, Tryphon sought some stratagem to do away with Jonathan, who appeared to constitute a serious threat as his armies increased and his influence grew stronger. Anxious to win a decisive victory, Tryphon appeared at Beth-shem in the head of a large army, but Jonathan's forces were just as strong, numbering 40,000 men. Knowing that he had no hope of defeating so great an army, Tryphon resorted to treachery with all possible ceremony, assuring him that he had no intention of full military that he was.
You broke up at assuring. You hear me?
Back. It's good.
You broke up at assuring when he said assuring him.
Okay.
What's happening is lagging. Yeah, well, oh, well. Okay. Well, we apologize, folks, for all the delaying and everything. See if we're gonna get back on here.
Yeah, well, she said one hope.
Is that better?
Lagging a little bit, but
it's the internet. I said, assuring him intention of fighting the Jews and had brought along his army for the purpose of according the full military due somehow or another doing his troops back to Judea, leaving only 3,000 men. He sent 2,000 to garrison Galilee. He retained as a guard of honor 1,000 men. Tryphon and his whole army to Echo. Once there, Tryphon's soldiers killed Jonathan's escort to the last man, and Jonathan himself was taken alive as a hostage. With Jonathan, his prisoner, Tryphon quickly advanced on Judea, convinced that now that the Jews were without their leader, he would have no trouble in defeating their army and conquering the entire country. To Jerusalem, where he summoned an emergency assembly of people and promised to follow in the steps of Jonathan. The people accepted Simon as their leader instead of Judah and Jonathan, their brother. Simon lost no time in taking action. He fortified the walls of Jerusalem and mobilized a new army, every sword bearer in Judea, and continued the siege of the Acra. Simon also dispatched the military leader Jonathan ben Absalom to conquer Jaffa, whose previous conquest seems to have been only a temporary one, designed to prevent the city from falling into the hands of Demetrius' men hostile to Jonathan. The idolatrous inhabitants were now expelled and Jews settled in their place. This had been the first action by a Hasmonean ruler to Judaize Palestinian cities outside of Judea. Therefore, it became the rule for the Hasmonean fighters to every idolatrous city, and from this carried on from Simon to his son John Hyrcanus. They went and made proselytes of these other nations, and from there they also did that with the Edomites, and from there that's where the Herodian people came from, because they were brought under the Jews' laws, and from there the Herodian empire come on. But we're going to save that for another video from part 2 as well. with the for the rise of the Pharisees. Therefore, it became the rule for the Hasmonean fighters to Judaize every idolatrous city they conquered if it was located within the borders of the kingdom of David and Solomon, and had idolatry imposed on it when the kings of Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, or the Hellenistic states held sway in Israel. The Hasmoneans believed the Jews were morally justified in recovering their patrimony, which had been forcibly seized by the strangers. The Hasmonean Judean nation campaign began in Jaffa, because since ancient times the city had been a prominent port, which ships sailed out only to Egypt, Tyre, and Sidon, but even as far as Tarshish. And the Jews needed an outlet to the sea in order to reach the civilized countries of the time. To be sure, the Jews were not yet primarily traders. The great majority were farmers, but they had no direct access to world markets for their grain and fruit crops. Only through ports seized by the inhabitants of the Greek cities in the south and the Hellenized Phoenicians in the north could they send their produce to market or obtain the goods of countries across the sea. But the foreign inhabitants of the coastal cities collected taxes on the imports and through the ports. Under these conditions, and by degrees to try and win back all the coastal cities of Palestine, Simeon took the last step. He began to Judaize the coastal cities, beginning with Jaffa, the port nearest Jerusalem. The Hasmoneans undoubtedly fought the Syrian king for religious, national, and political reasons, but very soon they became aware of the people's economic needs, even at the time of Joseph, and his son Hyrcanus. As the hour of liberation approached, the economic aspect of the War of Independence assumed greater prominence. With Jonathan still in his custody, Typhon proceeded from Acco with a large force, was met by Simon's army, and once again, Typhon tried to trick his adversary. He sent messengers to Simon to inform him that Jonathan had been taken prisoner because of his failure to pay the customary tribute upon his appointment. That Simon would deliver 100 talents of silver and turn over Jonathan's 2 sons as a guarantee against rebellion, Typhon will release Jonathan. While Simon sensed that this was a ruse, he was afraid of being accused of releasing his brother in order to make himself ruler of Judea. He accordingly sent the money and the 2 boys to Typhon. As Simon had anticipated, Typhon did not release Jonathan. The people besieged by Jonathan and Simon's army in Acra sent pressing appeals to Typhon to come to their aid. Typhon made an attempt to invade Judea from the south by the way of Adora and Idumea, but most unusual for the subtropical climate, snow fell in the night, blocking Typhon's line, and advanced and compelling him to divert his army and march in the direction of Gilead in the winter of 143 BCE. Furious at the failure of his plans, Jonathan executed and buried in the city of Basca, and it appears that he killed Jonathan's 2 sons as well. That left Jonathan's only remaining offspring, a daughter, who was married to Mattathias ben Simeon Phalius, the Staminer, from whom the historian Josephus descended from. So now, as we got into the history of that, now Jonathan is dead. Simon is about to assume Judea and become the high priest. We're going to read chapter 13, which is the last chapter. Which is the last chapter. So we're going to wrap it up with chapter 13, and Lord's willing, later on in the week or next Sabbath, we're going to continue part 2, which I don't know if it's going to be as long as this one. So First Maccabees chapter 13. Now when Simon had heard that Typhon had gathered together a great host to invade the land of Judea and destroy it, and saw that the people was in great trembling and fear, he went up to Jerusalem and gathered the people together and gave them exhortation, saying, Ye yourselves know what great things I and my brethren and my father's house have done for the laws and the sanctuary, the battles also and troubles we have seen, by reason wherefore all my brethren are slain for Israel's sake, and I am left alone. Now we understand also as well, through Simon came John Hyrcanus, which we're going to touch more about in part 2, because he played an important role in the rise of the Pharisees as well. Now, therefore, be it far from me that I should spare my own life in any time of trouble, for I am no better than my brethren. Doubtless, I will avenge my nation and the sanctuary and our wives and our children, for all the heathen are gathered to destroy us of a very malice. Now, as soon as the people heard these words, their spirit revived, and they answered with a loud voice, saying, Thou shalt be our leader instead of Judas and Jonathan thy brother. Fight thou our battles, and whatsoever thou commandest us, that we will do. So then he gathered together all the men of war, and made haste to finish the walls of Jerusalem, and he fortified it round about. And he sent Jonathan, the son of Absalom, with him a great power to Joppa, who casting out them that were within remained there in it. So Tryphon removed from Ptolemais with a great power to invade the land of Judea, and Jonathan with him in his ward, which was in ward means prison. But Simon pitched his tents in Adea over against the plain. Now when Tryphon knew that Simon was risen up instead of his brother Jonathan, he meant to join battle with him, and he sent his messengers to him, saying, Whereas we have Jonathan thy brother, and hold, it is for money that he is owing unto the king's treasure, concerning the business that was committed unto him. Wherefore now send 100 talents of silver, and 2 of his sons for hostages, that when he is at liberty he may not revolt from us, and we will let him go. Whereupon Simon, albeit he perceived that they spake deceitfully unto him, yet sent him the money and the children, lest peradventure, lest perhaps he should procure to himself great hatred of the people, who might have said, Because I have sent not the money and the children, therefore is Jonathan dead. So he sent them the children and the 100 talents. Howbeit Tryphon dissembled, neither would he let Jonathan go. Excuse me. And after this came Tryphon to invade the land and destroy it, going round about by the way that leadeth into Adora. But Simon and his host marched against him in every place, whithersoever he went. Now they that were in the tower sent messages unto Tryphon, to the end that he should hasten his coming unto them by the wilderness, and send them victuals. Wherefore Tryphon made ready all his horsemen to come that night. But they fell a very great snow, by reason whereof he came not. So he departed and came into the country of Gilead. And when he came near to Bascama, he slew Jonathan, who was buried there. And afterward Tryphon returned and went into his own land. Then sent Simon and took the bones of Jonathan his brother, and buried them in Modin, in the city of his fathers. And all Israel made great lamentation for him, and bewailed him many days. Simon also built a monument upon the sepulchre of his father and his brethren, and raised it aloft to the site with hewn stone behind and before. Moreover, he set up 7 pyramids, one against another, for his father, his mother, and his 4 brethren. Cunning devices, about which he set up pillars, and upon the pillars he made all their armor for perpetual memorial, and by the armor ships carved, by they might be seen of all that sail of the sea. This is a sepulchre which he made at Modin, and it standeth yet until this day. Now Tryphon dealt deceitfully with the young king Antiochus, and slew him, and he reigned in his stead, and crowned himself king of Asia, and brought a great calamity upon the land. Then Simon built up the strongholds in Judea, and fenced them about with high towers and great walls and gates and bars, and laid upon victuals therein. Moreover, Simon chose men as king, to the end he should give the land an enmity, because all Tryphon did was to spoil. Unto whom Demetrius answered and wrote after this manner: King Demetrius unto Simon the high priest, and friend of kings, as also unto the elders in the nation of the Jews, sendeth greeting. The golden crown and the scarlet robe which he sent unto us we have received, and we are ready to make a steadfast peace with you, yea, and to write unto our officers to confirm the immunities which we have granted. Excuse me. But whatsoever covenants we have made with you shall stand, and the strongholds which you have builded shall be your own, And for any oversight or fault committed unto this day, we forgive it, and the crown tax also, which ye owe us. And if there were any tribute paid in Jerusalem, it should be no more paid. We were met among you to lie in our, and look who are met among you to be in our court, and let their place be peace betwixt us. The heathen was taken away from Israel in 70th year. So when we look in the when Judea gained their independence, excuse me, in the 142 year of the Greeks, when they gained their independence, excuse me. Excuse me, throat's drying up. So thus the yoke of the heathen was taken away from Israel in the 170th year. So when it says the 170th year, this is talking about the year of the Greeks, but it was actually for the Hebrew calendar 142nd BCE. So it says so after that, so now Judea, they have cast away all the heathen, the Syrians, the Greeks, all the other nations. They no longer have strongholds, no forts, no garrisons. They completely left Judea. So Judea is completely independent with the sole ruler of Simon. Then the people of Israel began to write in their instruments and contracts in the first year of Simon the high priest, the governor and the leader of the Jews. In those days Simon camped out against Gaza and besieged it around about. He made also an engine of war and set it by the city and battered a certain tower and took it. And they that were in the engine leaped into the city, whereupon there was a great uproar in the city, and so much as the people of the city rent their clothes and climbed upon the walls with their wives and children and cried with a loud voice, beseeching Simon to grant them peace. And they said, deal not with us accordingly to our wickedness, but accordingly to thy mercy. So Simon was appeased toward them and fought no more against them, but put them out of the city and cleansed the houses wherein the idols were, and so entered into it with songs and thanksgiving. Yea, he put all uncleanness out of it, and placed such men as we should keep it, and the law, and made it stronger than it was before, and built therein a dwelling place for himself. They also of the tower in Jerusalem were kept so straight that they could neither come forth nor go into any country, nor buy nor sell. Wherefore they were in great distress for all victual, and perished through famine. Then cried they to Simon, beseeching him to be at one with them, which thing he granted them. And when he had put them out thence, he cleansed the tower from the pollutions, and entered into it the 23rd day of the second month in the 171st year, with thanksgiving and branches of palm trees, palm trees, and with harps and cymbals, and with viols and hymns and songs, because there was destroyed a great enemy out of Israel. He ordained also that day should be kept every year with gladness. And this is the day of Simon, or the feast of Simon. Moreover, the hill of the temple that was by the tower he made stronger than it was, and there he dwelt himself with his company. And when Simon saw that John his son was a valiant man, he made him captain of all hosts, and he dwelt in Caesarea. Now that Israel was part one. I know this was a long class. This was part one of the rise of the Hasmoneans. We went through the history, and the brother went through the scriptures for the Pharisees, and we were going over the history of the Pharisees, how they started off with good intention, and then later on they got corrupted and became hypocrites of the law. As we're going to read in part two, we're going to get more in depth in that. This one we covered Mattathias, Judas Maccabees, and his brother Jonathan and Simon, and how their leadership and their faith with the Most High and keeping of the covenant and laws brought an end to the Greek rulership in Judea and brought them an independent state, and how we saw how Jonathan dealt wisely with the kings of these other nations so much that they appointed him the high priesthood and sent him tributaries and gave him a high position, granted him to be governor. He wasn't going around saying, oh, the white man is the devil, this and blah, blah, blah. No, he dwelt wisely with them. That's how Joseph did with the king of Egypt. This how Daniel did with Nebuchadnezzar. This how Nehemiah dealt with Artaxerxes and the Persian captivity. So that's what, with that, like I said, brothers and sisters, we have to deal wisely with our enemies. And if we are a repentant Israelite in these high official government positions, we have brothers and sisters calling our men and women coons and sellouts for doing this. But no, people that's doing that, they don't have the understanding of the scriptures, or they haven't read Ezra, they haven't read the book of Daniel, they haven't read Genesis. They don't understand what it means to use wisdom and have the Most High on the side. They don't have faith that the Most High is going to redeem us once again. And with that, brother says, I'm going to end at that. And Brother Gam got anything to say. This was part 1 of the Hasmonean brought up. We saw the importance of how what Jonathan did, the sacrifices the Maccabean brothers made. That's why for them, for the day of Simon, they have the tomb still in Israel to this day, and how they did so much for Israel at this time in the Syrians. Brother.
I just want to say this is good to bridge the gap between, what is the Old Testament and where the prophecies of the gospel in Christ was to come to pass in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, and getting to explain what's happening as you read through the gospel and figuring out things like the Pharisees, mention the Sadducees while you was reading there. And for all who's listening, don't let nobody tell you not to read no book or nothing like that. You study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needs not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. We'll get into more the next time, coming up on the Pharisees and things like that. But just seeing that it's good. It's good to just it's a lot of information, take in what you can take in, so that you just have some knowledge of history, because it's not nothing that you're gonna learn in school. We got to go get it on our own, and it's out there for us to get. So get it. I mean, like in slavery, we was taught not to read. You'd be in trouble for reading. You might be beat and killed for reading. And now that we are past that, the first thing that our people like to do is when they learn something is still keep it from the rest of us for some reason. So don't fall into that trap where you got elders and officers in these Israelite camps who seem to be deep or studied in the scriptures, and they know everything, and then they tell you not to go not to go read, not to go learn nothing. If you're in the Lord and the Lord is guiding you, he'll rightly divide the word for you. He'll draw you to Christ and where you need to be. So this is our history, but why not? Because we ain't gonna get it nowhere else. So all praises for that. Did you want to put the emails out there or anything like that?
Yeah. For those who've been watching or those who new, YouTube channel saves 144. The email apostles.doctrine@gmail.com for the brothers and sisters who've been studying diligently, or who's been curious about baptism, or just questions in general. Or you can email us, hit us up on the Facebook page. We got Apostles Doctrine and Yahweh Shai 144, Joarib Israel. I answer most of the time on Facebook, or if not, like I said, send me an email. And like the brother was saying, it's not going to get brought out in the schools. This history is not going to, only way that is if you take in studying world history, ancient history in college and stuff like that. And even that it's still a distorted teaching it from the so-called Edomite perspective, where the so-called Jewish people are white men. But as we all know, that the Jews were men of color, women of color. Our history, we were not just, as they say, walking naked in the jungle and what's the word, civilized by the so-called white man, and slavery and Christianity, and slavery was the best thing that happened to us. No, we've been had the Most High God, but our ancestors, we got to the point that we broke the covenant so much that Jeremiah 17:4, the scriptures came to place that Israel was not going to be in remembrance anymore. So he completely wiped our memory of being Israel. But now what? During the Great Awakening, the Spirit is coming back upon us to reclaim our nationality and come back. And this is our history. This the Hasmonean dynasty. These are the Levites. These are our ancestors, our forefathers, our foremothers. They fought valiantly for the for a secure and independent Jewish state by the Greeks and the Syrians, who came and defiled the temple of the living God. They set up the abomination of desolation in the temple, which I think they said it was a statue of Zeus or Jupiter or something. They slaughtered unclean, unholy things on our altar, raped our women and children, put us into captivity, sold our men. And so the Most High stirred up the spirit of Mattathias, his sons, to redeem us out of that captivity. And this is the history that we need to be looking into, because this is our history. And it also what we turn back on the hand and put our trust in him. A lot of this stuff, Bibles, especially around the times that the slaves were starting to read. Imagine if slaves that can read during the 14, 15, 16, 1700s, you think Nat Turner's rebellion was something? You think, imagine all the slaves having a copy of the Maccabees and returning to God's laws and finding out that they were Israelites. America would have been shut down, what, about 200 years ago. Had the ability to read in English and read about the stories of our forefathers, how they valiantly fought for their freedom and the independence of the Jews. And that's what the Spirit said that we need to have, because this is our heritage that the Most High gave to us, that was passed down from generation to generation, which got lost back. We are what? Bethinking ourselves in the land of our captivity. History is a very important part of the history, because this is the gap between the old, the book of Malachi, and what's that was what, the Persian Babylonian captivity. The Malachi, I think that was that ended with the Babylonian captivity, even though it was the Babylonian, Persian, the Assyrian captivity. So it mentions Grecians a couple times in the Old Testament, but now all of a sudden, now you get to the New Testament, there's no difference between Jew or Greek. You got Hellenized Jews, you got the Romans occupying Israel. When did this happen? Now the Apocrypha is a link to that. And like the brother said, don't be scared to, especially if you well knowledge and can discern, then you can pick up the book of Josephus. You can get into the who's who minus the images that's in there with what you know are not the right images, and we can study these books and teach our people this history, because like I said, they're not going to teach you this in elementary school. They teach you that you the sons of Ham, or they even in church they teach you the sons of Ham. They teach you Canaanite and all this other stuff. We Africans, we suffering the curses of Ham, servants of servants. That's what they teach you in church. So-called black people is Ham, and we deserve slavery and all this other stuff. But no, they're not telling you the true history, that we are the apple of the Most High's eye, that we are the true Jews. So this is the history that our brothers and sisters need to bring forth, and we need to hear, so we can what? Restore ourselves to the rightful place and come back to the laws, statutes, and commandments in the faith of Christ. And that's all I got. Unless you got anything to answer that.
Nope. Peace and goodwill. What the email one more time? Apostles Doctrine.
Apostle Doctrine 144.
Apostles Doctrine 144 at Gmail. Okay.
With that, brothers and sisters, I pray this class was edifying. Like I said, for part 2, Simon, going into Simon and his death, and the rise of John Hyrcanus and the Pharisees for part 2. And with that, peace be upon you all, and enjoy the rest of your Sabbath.